and blew her a kiss, which she returned, the tears running down her face. Perhaps there was hope left. Perhaps someone might return from his exile on the Isle of Faces. She believed in Walter. She sat there for a long time, sensing something, the trembling in the air, the sounds just out of reach of her ears, the clash of swords that she could only sense and not hear. There were screams, so many screams, of fury and pain and fear. And then someone close screamed. She could not tell who was it. Her? Was it someone else? Who was it? A flickering form appeared in front of her, a burning shell of a man, half fire and half darkness, a creature that crawled on the floor and left smoking slime in his wake. There was a single eye in the ruined burnt face that looked at her, as shattered teeth gnashed at the air. She flinched back in her seat as it crawled its way towards her, and then Walter flickered into view. His face was blooded, his armor rent and torn, his sword was notched, but his stride was sure. No! Walter bellowed as he raised his sword over the thing on the floor in front of him. You will not have her. Or us. Or anyone, ever again. Die. The sword slashed down, deep into the back of the burning creature, which screamed in anguish. Walter pulled it out, panting, and then drove it home again. Other figures flickered into view around the screaming creature, and more blades rose and fell, hacking at the thing on the floor that was almost at her feet. She stood abruptly and pulled out her own belt knife, before looking at the thing before her. It was almost oozing away into the floor, but there was still that eye that looked at her. So she knelt and then she looked at the thing. This is for my family. And then she stabbed the eye. A wind rose in the room, something that brought the smell of burning into her nostrils at first, before it faded into emptiness. And just before she fell to her knees and fell asleep, she could see Walter and Osric behind him smiling at her and then vanishing into the light. Chapter 56. Chapter text. Kevan. He stood at the railing and looked down into the courtyard. Members of the Night's Watch were being drilled by Thorn, but off to one side he could see Geryon instructing his son through some quite advanced sword drills. Illyrian was skilled, he could see that at a glance. The young man, he was no boy, seldom made the same mistake twice. His face was intent, his concentration exact, he was a Lannister to his fingertips and something more. He looked at the sky for a moment, sighed, and then looked at Joffrey. Jaime's son was standing off to one side, watching Geryon and Illyrian, a look of deep and abiding conflict on his face. No, the boy did not understand. Would he ever? He sensed movement to one side and looked to see Adam Marbrand approaching him. As the heir to Ashmark joined him at the rail, he nodded down at the yard. What do you think of Illyrian? Marbrand pursed his lips in thought for a moment. Quick. Clever. He'll be good, one day. He looked at him for a moment. If he survives the war here, that is. I hope that we have time, Kevan said quietly. I know that they are coming. But I hope that we have time. They stood there, for a time, waiting and watching as Geryon continued his lesson with his son and then finally finished it, before walking off with his hand on Illyrian's shoulder, visibly proud of the lad. And then, finally, he asked, I know that it's been but a few days. But what do you think of Joffrey? Adam Marbrand visibly tried not to pull a face. The boy is, well, he is. I mean that. Speak plainly, please. I am not my elder brother. There was a pause. I think it might be too early to tell. The boy is poor at learning, at least so far. He seems to have learned nothing from the Hound, even though I know that he was taught much. Marbrand paused and sighed deeply. He's still arrogant, at heart. Cersei poured a lot of her poison into him. I don't know how long it will take to get it out of him. He's still used to being a prince of the realm and the heir to the Iron Throne. Being a bastard on the wall with the Night's Watch, the wound caused by his downfall is still raw. Still bleeding. But he must learn to live here or he will die. Kevan nodded. That fits with what I have seen. Keep teaching him, Sir Adam. Keep teaching him, until Jaime comes back from this mission of his with the Green Man. I will. Marbrand nodded formally and then took his leave. As he left, Kevan stared up at the sky for a long moment. Slate-grey clouds were scudding east and a little south and the wind was chilly. He wondered when there would be another summer snow up here. Gods, True winter here must be terrible, and yet they'd have to witness it, when the others came. Sir Kevan. He looked to one side, where a servant in Baratheon colours stood. His Grace the King has called on you and others to attend him at once in the main hall. Word has come from Winterfell. He nodded and strode off, wrapping his cloak around him and making a mental note to order something with a lot of fur on it whenever he was at the wall. Mere cloth, no matter how thick, would not be enough. When he reached the hall he could see Tywin already standing by the king, who was holding a message in one hand and gesturing at it with the other. The two had their eyebrows raised and would occasionally bring in the Lord Commander, who was looking at a number of papers. Tarly walked in with Geryon, with Thorne following, and Benjen Stark and Maester Aemon, along with Royce and Redfort, whereupon the king looked up. "My lords, sirs, news from Winterfell. Two messages, both surprising. Firstly, there is a child of the forest in Winterfell who says that Ned, Lord Stark, has killed the drowned god." He felt his eyebrows almost disappear into his hairline. Ned Stark had killed a god. Then he blinked. Wait, a child of the forest? Were they not extinct? The king rumbled, "I know, T sounds insane. But Catelyn Stark and Robb Stark have both signed this message. And there is more. A room has been found in Winterfell, a room with a chair that matches the one that was discovered in the Night Fort. Apparently when a Stark at the Night Fort sits in one at the same time that a Stark sits in the one at Winterfell, they can talk to each other. It's a magic of the first men, the rarest of magics, made by stonesingers. If it's true then it's valuable." "Stonesingers, your grace?" Royce asked, looking stunned. "Stonesingers are said to be rarer than wargs or greenseers. So rare that none have been seen in many a long year. Centuries, if not thousands of years." The king's eyebrows beetled up and down at this. "Robb Stark wishes to test the chairs. He will sit in it in 3 days' time, at noon. Benjen Stark, as the only Stark on the wall, we'll need you to be at the Night Fort at the same time to sit in the chair there. Lord Commander, how does the work at that castle progress?" "It's the biggest of the castles on the wall and as such has needed the most resources," Mormont said. "Much has been done, but it's not yet rebuilt. Not just yet. That said, it's been repaired enough that there's a garrison there. And we must consider moving the leadership of the Night's Watch there at some point, once it is repaired in full. Then I will travel there tomorrow, with Benjen Stark, and whoever wishes to travel with me, to see this. My lords, this could be vital to our communications with the lands to our south. What we might learn here could be important beyond words." There was a rumble of words in support of the king's words. And then the king nodded at all of them and strode off, the Lord Commander, Maester Aemon and Benjen Stark at his heels. Tywin strode towards him. "Well, now. I'll go with them. He's right, this could be vital and a Lannister should be there to witness it." A wintry smile crossed his face and Tywin grasped his arm and pulled him closer for a moment. "Ned Stark might have killed a god. A god. If we win this war, if we prevail, and the Game of Thrones ever reasserts itself, do you have any idea how powerful and influential the Starks will be? We must be mindful of this. We must ally with them. Start thinking how to, brother. Start thinking. Jon Stark." The voyage back to Pike was a strained one. For much of it he could see Asha Greyjoy at the prow of the ship, her eyes on the horizon, her face set in lines that spoke of uncertainty and tension. He knew why. The bedrock of so many of her people was suddenly gone, thanks to father. And the Iron Islands were in flux, dancing about like fireflies in the wind. After the lookout finally called out that Pike was in sight he shook his head a little and then walked over to where Ygritte was standing. She was a bit pale but she seemed to have more sea legs than before. "You all right? Thinking about too much to think about the sea?" She smiled a strained smile at him. "I'll be happy to get back to the north. Where things make sense." He smiled back at her and took her hand. "There's a lot to do there. I need to find us a holdfast. A place to live. Father promised me good land, so that I can be a bannerman to Robb. Found a cadet branch." "What does that even mean, cadet?" He looked at her. "A junior branch of Starks. Like, the Karstarks. They were Starks once. Cousins to the Starks of Winterfell." Now he widened the smile into a grin. You've got a lot of Neela ways to learn, as my wife. She returned his gaze and there was a challenge in that look. Oh, and you've got a lot to learn yourself, John Stark. How to do a lot of things. Lead people. You're not bad. You need to get better. Her face went bleak for a moment. The wall had better hold. It'll hold, he told her. It has to. And then he walked behind her and wrapped her up in a hug that she returned, holding his arms as the sea rushed past them on either side. I just hope that father's all right. You're worried about the Stark. He killed. She dropped her voice as she eyed the solemn-faced Ironborn as they went about their tasks about the ship. Him. I'm worried, he replied. We don't know if he was injured in it. And if there's one thing I've learned recently, it's that all things come with a cost somewhere. There's always a price to pay. Then you do know something then, John Stark. Husband. She twisted slightly in his arms to look at him and he kissed her quickly. When the harbor near Pike came into view there was more shouting and signaling and pulling on ropes and all the things that slightly bewildered him, before they finally started to approach the quay where they could moor. There was a crowd gathering there and he eyed it worriedly, before seeing two familiar faces. The first was Asher and Theon's mother, who was still wearing black but who looked much more composed than she had before. The second was also dressed in black and leaning on a crutch. He's seen him briefly before on Harlaw. Victorian Greyjoy. The reader had come on deck now, having sent his own ship onto Harlaw, and Stannis Baratheon was next to him. The two seemed to have forged an understanding, not a friendship. He doubted that the hand of the king was capable of making friends, and they seemed to understand each other. As the ship moored at the dock he watched as Asher Greyjoy waited by the gangway, visibly calm, but he could see the small visual clues that showed that she was boiling under the surface. When the gangway was ready she strode down it. Mother. Nuncle Victorian. Both bowed to her, Victorian awkwardly due to his obviously injured knee. Pike is yours, Victorian boomed, before looking deeply uneasy. We must speak in private, niece. Things have happened that. The drowned men have lost their god, Asher's mother said firmly. Some are quite mad. Others are just unsettled. All say the same thing, that the voice in their head is gone. The drowned god is dead. Someone howled it from the crowd before them. What shall we do now? Asher Greyjoy's face turned to stone for a moment. We will continue. She shouted the words as she looked around at the crowd. We are Ironborn. Of these islands. Of this blood. Yes, the drowned god is dead. If anything, her face turned harder. We have more to think of. The others come. We know this. They came here, to Pike. How many here lost kin when they attacked? How many? We are at war. There is a fight to come that we all heard of. The Stark calls for aid. At the wall. We fight there and we watch the seas for any other attack on us or any other shore. Who else can guard and fight and watch like we can? Who else? The crowd stirred and muttered and then cheered at Asher as she grimly pulled her sword out of its scabbard and then lifted it over her head. We are Ironborn. Ironborn. The crowd replied. Ironborn. Stannis Baratheon swapped a glance with the reader and then at Theon and himself. She'll do. Sandor. He was thoughtful as he sat there and looked about the courtyard. It wasn't the main one of Winterfell, it was one of the few small ones, but that fitted his mood. The little paper message from the Raven that had come from the Westerlands was in his hand and he looked at it once again and then sighed. Clegane Keep was his. He was the lord of it, or the sir of it, or whatever the fuck the right empty title was. The monster had ruined whatever status the title sir had in his mind. What to do now? What could he do now? Go home. Where was home? Home hadn't been Clegane Keep for a long time now. A very long time indeed. Not since he was burned really. And now he was healed. But he knew that some scars could not go away. A mug of ale was set in front of him and he looked up to see Beth in front of him. She looked worried. Are you all right, Sandor? He flipped the message in his hand lightly. I have a keep. Clegane Keep. With him dead, I inherit. Beth sat down next to him and gazed at him with concern. And, is that not good? A bitter laugh ripped its way out of him. I don't want it. I've got no happy memories of it, not after the monster burned my face for daring to take his tour. My father didn't punish him, my mother was afraid of him, my sister, that old hatred burned again in the depth of his mind. She died, he said eventually. And I think he killed her. Clegane Keep is not home. I never knew a home. So I don't want it, even though it's mine now. They sat there for a long moment as she looked at him with a furrowed brow and something in her eyes that made him try but fail to look away. He's dead, she said eventually. You and Lord Robb killed him. He was possessed, and evil even before that. We were all warned about him, all of us servants. Lord and Lady Stark told us that the man was to be avoided. Run from if need be. I know what he was like, he said, and the hate was black and poisonous on his tongue. He sipped the ale, but it did not take the taste away. And that's the other thing. To some in Clegane Keep I'm a kinslayer. I killed my brother. You and Lord Robb killed him as he tried to kill Lord Robb, and the Lady Valbeth told him urgently. You did the right thing. You're a good man, Sandor Clegane. A good man. And don't let anyone tell you otherwise. He hung his head in shame at her words. Good. For years I was just the hound. I was the golden brat's sworn sword. When he gave me orders, I had to obey. I've done things, Beth. Terrible things. I'm not a good man. I don't know what I am. There was a strained silence, and then her grip on his hand tightened. I know what you are. The Green Man wouldn't have healed you unless you were a good man. Mayhaps you've just been on the wrong path until now. But you're here now, with me now, and I say that you're a good man. The call has gone out and you are here. The others come. Lord Stark's called for aid. You're needed. And I need you. I love you, Sandor Clegane. You're not a hound anymore. You're a free man. He scrubbed at his eyes for a moment, cursing at himself, and then he raised his head and looked at her. Her gaze, gods, her gaze. She trusted him. He smiled a strained smile at her. A free man. Thank you, Beth. And I love you too. But I still don't know what to fucking do. Can't you talk to Lord Tyrion about the keep? He frowned. What, about what? Swapping it or something? A keep in the north for a keep in the Westerlands. A keep in the north. You helped Lord Robb. The Starks owe you a debt. And you're here. In the north. I don't know how lords manage these things, but, she shrugged her shoulders. Then she took a deep breath. I mean, you don't see Clegane Keep as home. Why not make a real home? Here, in the north. You've said so often how much you like it here. We call a spade a bloody shovel here. Why not? There was, again, something in her eyes. And she made sense. He mulled it over as he sat there and sipped on his ale. You're wiser than I am, Beth. I can ask. I can try. I never thought about it much. I always that the monster and I would fight one day, and I'd hopefully kill him and probably die in the doing of it. More than that. She smiled at him again. You didn't dream of more. A wife. A family. He brought a hand up and ran it over the flesh and hair of his restored face. I didn't dare ever hope. I just existed. And then the Green Man changed me and the monster died. Then hope, she said urgently. Hope here. In the north. With me. Build something here, Sandor. Build a home with me. She was flushed with emotion, and he felt something shift inside him, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. And then he grinned at her and pulled her close and kissed her. Gendry. He looked down at the glowing runes on the breastplate and sighed a little. He'd done a good job on it, or at least he was sure he'd done a good job, and that was what worried him. He was relying on runes from a book. Yes, the Royces had preserved much, what was the word? Runecraft. Rune lore. But no one had used runed armor against the others in thousands of years. And that was what worried him. Yes, the Thuns had assured him that the runes made sense, that the Royces had remembered truly, that the runes made sense, but he was still fearful that somewhere along the way he'd made a mistake, that something might go awry at some point. He wiped his hands almost absent-mindedly on a piece of cloth and then frowned down at the breastplate. It was good work, he could see that at a glance. But, the runes still worried him. And so he put it to one side, banked his tools carefully against the wall, checked that all was put away as it should be in the forge and then nodded to the others and walked out into the courtyard. A thin snow was falling, not hard, but enough to dust everything with white. He still marveled a little at the tiny feathers of cold that fell from the sky. He could barely remember the last winter, not that it had truly had King's Landing in its grip, not like here. No, never like here. The north was huge and bare and cold. And beyond the wall was colder still and had evil creatures born of the cold and something greater and nastier, or so he'd been told. He stood there for a moment, irresolute, and then he sighed and walked towards the Maester's quarters. Along the way he could see Joffrey Hill training with Sir Adam again, the lad sweating and scowling and, gods, he was useless. He kept making the same mistakes and Sir Adam was quiet but pointed in his criticism, not that the little brat seemed to be listening. Gendry shook his head for a moment. Gods. They were close enough in age, and here he was calling Joffrey Hill a brat. Frankly, he couldn't think of another word for him. Well, not a polite one, anyway. The Maester's door loomed and he drew himself up and knocked on it as politely as he could. After a moment the Maester's assistant, Jen the Wilderling, opened it and squinted at him suspiciously. And what do you want, Gendry Strongarm? A word with the Maester, if you please, Jen, he said politely. Tell him I need to talk of runes. Jen's eyes widened for a long moment and then she nodded. A moment. She closed the door and he could hear voices in the room beyond, before the door opened and she gestured him in. Maester Aemon was sitting at a large table, surrounded with books and papers around him. For such an old man, he looked remarkably active and vigorous. Ah, young Gendry. What can I do for you, young man, about runes? He nodded formally and then hesitantly approached, pulling the book out as he did. Maester Aemon, he paused and tried to gather his scattered thoughts. I mean, I want. The old Maester eyed him kindly and then gestured for him to sit. Now. Marshal your thoughts. I see that you have a book there. He answered with a nod and handed it over. Lord Royce gave it to me. It's from Runestone. And it's about runes. But. I'm worried. The purple eyes of the Maester looked at him. About what? Making a mistake. He took a deep breath. They call me runesmith, he all but gabbled, but although I can carve the runes and make them glow, what if they are wrong somehow? What if I make a mistake in this? Runes to battle the others haven't been carved in hundreds of years. Thousands. I know that I have the book, which says I'm getting them right, but, is the book right? He closed his eyes for a long and anguished moment. His Grace the King is my father, and I've been scribing runes on his armor. And he's the Storm King, or he's fated to be, I don't know. He'll battle the others. And I don't want the runes to fail him. How can I be sure that they won't? Maester Aemon looked at the book for a long moment and then looked at him, and there was an assessing look to his gaze that made Gendry straighten in his seat as if at attention. My boy, the Maester said eventually, before pausing. No great-great-grand-nephew, for that is what you are. We are related, you know. There is much of your father in you, but I see a few touches of your great-grandmother in you. And she would have approved mightily of what you have just said. He smiled a tiny, almost bitter, smile. She valued knowledge and how to use it. The thought of the fact that they were related left him gobsmacked for a long moment. I'm just a bastard, he said eventually. No, you are not, the Maester said with a sharp look. You are a Baratheon. And your fears are valid and should be addressed. He looked at him and then sighed slightly. Runes have not been carved for many years, not the true runes that should be used to fight the others, so you are quite right in that. However, the Royces have remembered much and this book is founded on that. So, I shall consult my books and what we have here. Have you asked the Thans about this? I have, he admitted. They think that I'm worrying over nothing. But I want to be sure. This seemed to almost amuse the old man. There are so very few sureties in life, he said wryly after a moment. There are times when what we are sure of is built on stone and other times built on sand. It is not until the storm comes that we know the truth. The storm's what worries me, Gendry admitted. And I don't want anyone to be swept away because of me getting a rune wrong. Then we will study together, Maester Aemon said with a smile. Now tell me what runes you are most worried about. If things need to be corrected, then we should correct them now, before this war on the wall starts in earnest. Jaime. He could never have thought, or guessed, or even japed, that he would have attended a wedding north of the wall. And yet that was what he had done not long after dawn that day. And the couple had been the oddest one, in thought at least, that he could have thought. The Blackfish and Brian of Tarth. What a noisy pair they had been, in that cave. TCH echoes. The moment that they'd left the crag, the location of which he'd tried to memorize, they had ridden hard in one direction, led by the Green Man. He'd taken them straight to a heart tree, and there, with the occasional glare at the Blackfish and mutter that he had better treat his great-granddaughter properly, he'd married the pair of them. It had all been most, well, as Tyrion would say, singular. Especially when the two of them had kissed. It gave him the oddest feeling that for the first time in his life the Blackfish was complete. And then they had started to ride north again. He couldn't help but reflect bitterly as they rode about the cruelties of life and of love. The Blackfish and Brian had found each other. Tyrion had found his Daisy. And he would never have anyone. Save, perhaps, a whore in Mola Town who had some affection for him, or his own hand. There were a long list of people to blame for all of this, starting with Aerys fucking Targaryen, who had hated father so much that he'd appointed him to the Kingsguard, despite him being a green youth. But the beginning and end, properly speaking, of blame all came down to him. Himself. He had bent the knee to the Mad King. Yes, he'd killed the insane murdering lunatic, but then he hadn't told anyone why, even though people had been put at risk. And then he'd betrayed a second king by bedding that king's wife and putting 3 babes in her belly. His own sister. Madness. Simple madness. And all the time, every step of the way along that path of madness, he'd done what he did because of what? Because parts were easy. Because he'd been scared of what might happen if he spoke out against it. Because he had no words. They crested a rise and looked out at a shallow valley beyond, with a scattering of trees here and there and what looked like the remains of a village in the middle. The wall around the settlement looked hasty and slipshod, and much of it was fallen, parts burned, as much as he could see through the layer of snow and ice. Had the wind uncovered parts of it? That wind was cold and harsh, and he shivered a little and thanked the gods that he had followed Tyrion's instructions to the letter in the layering of his clothes. I like not the look of that, the Blackfish said grimly after a moment. Abandoned by wildings, yes. Yes, said the Green Man in a voice as grim. And I can smell a bad end to many down there. We'll ride around it. Upwind where we can. He looked about and almost seemed to sniff the air as if to sense something. Ride swiftly, we must get north now. As they skirted the village and then rode hard for the next ridge, he looked at the remains of the settlement and narrowed his eyes. Were some of the snow-covered lumps and bumps shivering or moving? A trick of the light perhaps. Then he looked over to the Green Man, who was also looking in the same direction. White's the former Kingsguard snarled. Sleeping uneasily, or the nearest thing to it for their kind. We have no time to end them. Coming back perhaps. But not now. And there might be another nearby. Once they reached the other rise they slowed and then rode on, the Green Man standing up at times in his stirrups to look ahead, before relaxing a little. On, north. They rode, and with every mile that passed he wondered at what they were doing here and what the others were sensing. There was one moment when all 3 of them stopped and looked to the east, before swapping glances and then riding on. Uneasy feelings, Brian of Tarth said reluctantly when they stopped at noon to eat and to rest the horses. Something happened. She seemed to struggle for a long moment to find the words. Something bad happened there, not too long ago. It's like something walked over many graves there. People died. He watched her face work and then saw the way that the Blackfish reached out to hold her hand and then lean over to rest his forehead against hers for a long moment, and once again he felt a stab of envy at what they had. And then, about an hour or so after that, they came across what he would later always call a boneyard, or what remained of one. There was a great burned circle of trees around a large clearing that had what looked like some snow-covered barricades around it. And in that burned circle were burned bones and other bones. Skulls. Teeth. The wildlings fought here, against the others and their whites, the green man said quietly. And perhaps one here, for a while. Until they fled south again. Be watchful. He swallowed thickly, sniffing at the old and too familiar stench of human ash and fat, before nodding and riding on. Gods! It was all true. Every bit of it. He'd had that lingering worm of doubt in him, that last fragment of uncertainty, which was now gone. They were all in mortal danger, he knew that, he really believed that, it was real. He had the oddest need to talk to, well, rant at Tyrion. So many pieces had, so to speak, fallen into place in his head. So many thoughts. The others were not a mad figment of someone's imagination. He'd really known that, the first time that he'd seen a snarling head in a cage, but belief. Belief was something else. And now he believed. And shivered. What else was out there? And what should he be afraid of? Truly afraid? Ned. With every report, every dispatch, every whisper, of how the region around Old Town was recovering, he felt a lifting in his heart. The blight was vanishing from the reach, there could not be the slightest doubt of that now. Wheat was standing taller, apples were ripening, grapes were plumper than before. The prospect of famine in the reach, something that had terrified him, was vanishing. And with it the fears of the realm. The blight had been tied indeed to the drowned god, who had somehow been driven into a frenzy to escape his prison by the call, or so their theory ran. And the death of the drowned god was echoing in all kinds of places. According to Lord Hightower, at least 3 innkeepers and 4 ship's chandlers in Old Town had been reported as having gone raving mad, screaming about the silence. 2 had killed themselves, one by pounding his head against a stone wall and the other by calmly tying a sword to a door frame and then frantically running onto it to impale himself. Ironborn Lord Hightower had said grimly, some pretending to be reachmen. And devout enough in their belief in the drowned god to be effectively drowned men. Father always wondered if the Ironborn had eyes in Old Town. I would say yes, they had. No longer though. Maybe. Perhaps not. Old Town was a huge city and he wondered how many other inhabitants of the docks would turn out to have ties to the Iron Islands. He sighed and looked down at the map he had been studying for some time now. He wanted to be away from the south as soon as he could arrange it. Starks did not prosper in the south and he would not feel safe until he was home in the north. Safe. That was a relative word, was it not, with the others marching on the wall, with war looming over them all. But he could not go, not yet. He had a promise to keep. He needed to go into Dawn and bring back Willam Dustin's bones. He'd promised Barbary Dustin that he'd do so and he could not go back on his word. He had to do it, he had to go there, he couldn't send someone to do it. Too many eyes were on him now and he felt uneasy about it all. He didn't want to go to that accursed place, but he had to. He sighed again and rubbed a hand over his face. Well. Perhaps a quick visit to Highgarden, to discuss supplies for the north, and then a quick and quiet, if that could be arranged, ride to the Prince's Pass and the place where the Tower of Joy had once stood. If he could curse Rhaegar Targaryen for nothing else, it would be for that utterly cruel name. The Tower of Joy. The place where his sister was raped repeatedly and finally died. He had pulled most of the place down to make the cairns for the dead. Even Hightower went, and poor anguished Arthur Dane. Would the cairns still be there? If he brought back Willam's bones, should he also retrieve the other bones, sending them back to the north, to Old Town, Harrenhal and Starfall? Well, the bones would be light. But he also didn't want the attention. Too many eyes on the past. Too many eyes on the secret of Jon's true parentage. Perhaps a short, quick visit. He'd take just his guards, men who wouldn't talk or speculate about why Rhaegar had left Lyanna there with members of the King's Guard. They'd just go for the bones. Knuckles rapped on the door to one side and he turned to look at it. Enter. A man in Tyrell colors walked in, watched by his guards. Lord Stark, Lords Tyrell and Hightower send their compliments and ask that you join them at the main gate of the High Tower. The man eyed the direwolf that was watching him. The Lady Frostfyre as well. A situation has developed there. Ned frowned a little as he rolled up the map and placed it to one side, before picking up the Fist of Winter and placed it in its leather sheath at his side. What kind of situation? The Tyrell man stood there irresolute there for a moment and then his lip curled a little. There is a delegation from the Starry September here, my lord. They claim to be here to seal and cleanse and finally close the gate under the high tower. He quivered for a moment. My lord, I was there in the tunnel when you fought the drowned god. I have no words for their demands. And then he clamped his mouth shut and nodded somberly. Ned eyed him for a moment and then nodded back at him. I understand. I'll come now. He looked at Frostfear, who came to her feet and shook herself before padding almost silently over to him. Let's meet some fools, he told her quietly, acknowledging her snort of wolfish derision, and then they strode off. When they arrived at the gate he could see that things were tense. There was a knot of septons in fine clothing, richly dyed garments that must have cost a lot. The leading one was even clutching a scepter with a sparkling crystal on top. In front of them were Willers Tyrell, Lord Hightower and Noy, the Septon of the High Tower and a good and decent man. He had arrived towards the back of the Septons and he quirked his lips, gestured to his guards to stay back and then walked quietly to the rear of the group, listening carefully. As he approached he could see Willers notice him and then raise an eyebrow, but he shook his head, which allowed him to hear the blustered nonsense from the leading Septon. Lord Tyrell, Lord Hightower, as I said, we are here to finally close and cleanse the dread gate below our feet. What it was that tried to escape through it, it must be finally repelled by the power of the Seven and the gate shut, also by the power of the Seven. Lord Hightower's nostrils flared. The drowned god is dead, he was flung through the gate and the gate is quiet again. Lord Stark defeated the drowned god with the aid of the old gods, so your presence here is meaningless mummery. The Septons collectively scowled, with the exception of Noy, who looked as if he was looking at a group of fools. Lord Hightower the Septon with the scepter said, the old gods are no more than shadows and myths compared to the Seven who are one. The creature that was at the gate was no god either. Whatever it was, the Seven pushed it back, as everything that happens is as to their plan. And we must now complete the work with a ceremony at the gate that shall sanctify it. I was at the gate when Lord Stark battled the drowned god, said Noy in a loud voice. I was a part of the crowd, along with Lords Tyrell and Hightower. I saw what that terrible thing was. It was the drowned god, a thing of madness and wrath, the thing that killed Septon Alaston. I was there when he died as well. I know of what I speak. You. Were you there? No, you were not. You know not of what you speak, Septon Curres. The Septon went red in the face with fury. You are close to heresy, Noy. And you are a fool, Curres. I was there. I saw Lord Stark and Lady Frostfear fight the drowned god. I saw them grow in size with the blessing of the old gods. Did you? No. What you saw was what happened, Ned bellowed, and the group of Septons jerked and scattered at the sound, looking over their shoulders and blanching as he strode through them with Frostfear. Curres went white as he approached, but then seemed to rally as Ned stood with Willers and the others. Lord Stark. Ned looked him up and down before tilting his head. Septon. You must be from the Starry September, yes. The Septon lifted his chin a little and nodded, hefting the scepter with its crystal a little. Now that he could see it more closely he could see that it had been gilded, and not by a skillful hand, whilst the crystal looked more high quality. Yes, Lord Stark. We are from the Starry September. We, thank you for your efforts, but we are clear in our view that we must now seal the gate under the high tower. The gate is already closed, Ned said coldly. You seek to do something that is no longer required. The drowned god is dead. Heresy. The word was hissed by a Septon in the crowd and Ned swept them all with a black look that made them all take a slight step back. I was there. I fought the drowned god. And, with the aid of the old gods, I slew the drowned god. And that is the end of it. Are you seeking to claim my victory? And to one side Frostfear growled, a long low sound of warning that made the Septons step even further back. My Lord Stark, Curres said in what was almost a snarl. The gate is a heathen, blasphemous, creation of the, and then went as white as a sheet, almost biting the words he had been about to say back into his mouth. You were about to say the first men, weren't you, Septon? Ned said coldly. My ancestors and the ancestors of many of the men here. How many of you heard the call? From the various uneasy looks and shuffling of feet, the answer must have been almost all of them. However, Karaz made an attempt to rally them. With a simple ceremony, the blessings of the seven will. Will what? Ned almost bit the words off. Allow you to claim that the drowned god is truly gone now, with the aid of your sparkling bit of glass on a stick. He's dead, he's gone, I killed him, the end. And then he leant forwards until he was almost nose to nose with the irritating little streak of piss. And the old gods helped me. Karaz jerked back, his eyes wide and his mouth agape, and his scepter fell from his hands and fell to the floor, where it shattered. Not that the Septon seemed to care, because he was gaping at Ned. His eyes, and then they all fled for the doors that led outside, not quite at a run but certainly at a fast trot, with the occasional stumble as one shot a fearful look at him. Ned watched them go with a scornful look, folding his arms and shaking his head in disgust, before looking back at the others. Why do men like them always scurry across the floor after a victory, desperate to take the credit? Because they think that they can, Willers replied. And they forgot that you were still here and that I am not my father. And they are worried the call awakened a lot of things. Weakened the starry September as well, especially after that fool Aliston tried and died at the foot of the gate. The Lord of the Reach shuddered. When his body stood well, I think I have seen a kind of white. I have seen the undead. And then he looked at Ned. And I have seen you touched by the old gods again now. Ned stared at him. Again. The reason they fled. Your eyes were red. He nodded. I think that that is a tale that must be spread about the city. I doubt that Karaz will be back. And if he tries, he'll regret it. Robert. They rode from Castle Black not long after dawn, a cavalcade of cloaked men, the crowned stag banner at the forefront, others following. It wasn't as large a group as he might have expected in previous years, but he was happy with their numbers. Their destination was still being rebuilt and he couldn't take that many. There were enough of them. The Lord Commander at his side, the first ranger behind, Lords Lannister and Tarly, Redfort and Royce, Raider as well and others, including the frail but determined figure of Maester Eamon and his wilderling assistant. He had to smother a bitter smile at the absence of the usual bootlickers and dregs of the court. Life here on the wall was too hard for some. Good. Useless cunts, the lot of them, all talk and no balls. Good at lofty phrases, all wind and words. Here at the wall, though, life was harder than they could take. Few had come with the court to Winterfell, fewer still had made it to Castle Black. No, those who were there with him were there for a reason. The war on the wall. Oh, he wasn't a fool. Men like Tarly were there because they loved war and flocked to the horns of war. Others were like Tywin Lannister, who was there because his children had found new and different ways to fuck up and was there to retain his standing in the court and the kingdom. The road along the base of the wall was good, well maintained now and better than it had been in many decades, as Mormont had told them, so their progress was good. There was a lot of traffic along it, volunteers, Night's Watch, others from the Seven Kingdoms. Rallying to the wall. Thanks the gods for all of them, they'd need them all to repair centuries of neglect at the castles. His mood always darkened as he thought about that. The Targaryens yet again. Tywin Lannister had told him quietly that the Tower of the Hand contained written records of previous hands of the king, with Targaryen comments about the Night's Watch always straying into fears that the organization was the private army of the Starks. He had to admit that his father had commented that they might be such a group, but he long remembered the quizzical horror on Ned's face when he'd asked him bluntly at the Eyrie if the Night's Watch obeyed the orders of Ned's own father. He shook his darkened mood off and paid more attention to the road ahead. He had better things to do than curse over foolish Targaryens and their misunderstandings about the way that the North worked. They made good progress, galloping at times around blockages on the road. They reached Queen's Gate, which was almost restored, by mid-morning, and then they paused at Deep Lake 2 hours after noon to eat. That castle was well under repair as well, fresh tiles on the roofs and new buildings amidst the repaired older ones. Mormont looked at the place, grunted and nodded, which was the equivalent of a score of flowerier words. They ate in the hall, a simple meal but enough for the trip ahead of them, washed down with watered wine. That was something about the North that he liked. The water there was cleaner there. Bloody cold in places though. And afterwards, as they started to prepare to head on for the night fort, he looked the place over, trying to look for weaknesses. The gate through the wall was already being blocked up and iced over. No, this place would stand. And then he heard the sound of voices off to one side. 3 men were at the southern gate, 3 dressed in the black of the Night's Watch and another who wore the tabard of House Greyjoy, something that made his skin crawl at once. After a long moment the guards let them through after beckoning for other guards to escort them, and they made straight for him, before bending the knee before him. "Your Grace," the leading man of the Night's Watch said, "we are from Westwatch by the bridge, which is being restored. We are here with dispatches that arrived there from the Iron Islands brought by this messenger from Asher Greyjoy." The Greyjoy messenger dipped his head in acknowledgement and then held a large oilskin-covered pouch out to him. He took it and undid the stitching with his belt knife and then looked at the thick wedge of papers within. "My thanks to you all, and also to Lord Greyjoy. I'll draw up a response. We ride for the night fort this afternoon. You can eat and rest here and then join us there. The response will be ready in a day or so." They nodded, looking pleased, and walked off after bowing a little awkwardly, and he pulled out the message within. It was written in 2 hands, one of Lord Harlaw and the other being the new Lord Greyjoy, and the tale was one of death, betrayal and madness. He looked up and gestured to a Baratheon guardsman. "Fetch Lord Commander Mormont and Maester Aemon, at once." "Aye, Your Grace." The guard nodded and took off at a run. He kept reading the messages, his heart twisting in his chest as he read and reread it. After a while he heard the sound of footsteps and looked up to see the arrival of the 2 men he had summoned. "From Pike," he said bleakly. "You both need to read this, the others too. Gods, what a tale." He passed the papers over and then ran his hands through his hair. "Magic. Others. And whatever the fuck Euron Greyjoy had become, what he was doing. Gods. At least they knew that Ned was alive and had triumphed, but, should he have gone with Ned? They still didn't know exactly what had happened at the High Tower had there been a cost to Ned in his victory. He wanted to fly into 1,000 pieces in all kinds of different directions, and then he caught himself and clenched his fists and took a deep breath. Focus, man, focus. For a moment he could feel something jolt deep inside him, and then Maester Aemon raised his voice. "Euron Greyjoy, it seems, is a fleshsmith. My gods. I had hoped that such knowledge had died from this world of ours." He looked at the man and then hurried over and guided the white-faced old man to a bench, looking around for some wine. There was a flagon to one side and a cup, and he poured a drink for the Maester of Castle Black and gave it to him. "Here, Aemon, drink this." Aemon Targaryen took the cup with trembling hands and drank from it. "My thanks, Your Grace." What a tale within these words. What a terrible, terrible tale. What Euron Greyjoy's crew much have endured, to be twisted in such a way. Word has already gone out about his crimes, but to read this full tale, Mormont shivered. Kinslaying, alliance with the others, and this. None of this makes any sense. To a normal man, no, Aemon said, sounding stronger already. But to someone who has accessed the darkest of Valyria's secrets. Then it is not a question of sense but of power, power over others. Power over those he sees as being lesser than he. This Euron Greyjoy doubtless places himself above we mere men. His purpose, his task, makes sense to him, and him alone. We must be very wary of him now. He views us all as puppets, and he is, in his eyes, the puppet master. A grim silence fell. "Warnings must be sent again," Robert said with a sigh. "You're right, he cannot be underestimated. More ravens must be sent to warn again of him. We'd best tell the others here, before we ride again for the night fort." They did so, to be met with horrified mutterings and even a look of deep, profound unease on the face of Tywin Lannister when he read what had happened on the Silence, something that unnerved Robert more than he cared to admit to. Not long after that they rode on down the road, a more silent group than had started. They hadn't exactly been jovial before, but the tale from the Iron Islands had cast a pall over all of them. When he first saw the great bulk of a castle on the horizon by the wall, he realized at a glance why the night fort had been abandoned, as the Night's Watch had started to fail. It was the biggest of the castle on the wall and must have been such a drain on its resources just to keep it operational that of course they had abandoned it for Castle Black. He could hear horrified mutterings from the men around him as they approached it and noted how run down it was, but Mormont and Benjen Stark seemed almost cheerful as they looked at it. "They've done well," Benjen called out to the Lord Commander. "The repairs are starting to really show now." "You mean it was worse than this?" Sir Kevan Lannister spluttered. "It was worse," his brother Geryon said grimly. "There were trees growing in the main courtyard and all the roofs had holes in them or were sagging. There were work teams all over the castle as they approached, some in black cloaks and others in different colors, showing the mix of people at work on the night fort. The man in charge was a grizzled old black brother who had a Stormlander accent and who he vaguely remembered had been a third or fourth son of a very small house near the Dornish border. The great hall of the night fort was habitable, along with the stables and a few other buildings in the castle, and after they had stabled their steeds and settled into their quarters, which must have been below the high standards of some, not that he gave a damn, he gathered them all in the great hall. "We need to see this chair and then this magic gate that's here." Benjen Stark led them the chair at once, down under the great hall, walking down stairs that took them past the tombs of long-dead Lord Commanders of the Night's Watch. When they reached the room that contained the chair, he felt his skin crawl just looking at the thing. There was something about it that left him with the oddest feeling that something was, somehow, looking back at him. That made no sense, but he took his time in inspecting it, walking around it and eyeing it carefully. "So that's the chair," I said, Benjen Stark with a sigh. "Now that I look at it, it's a part of the ground, is it not? It looks as if it was not hewn out of the stone but molded. Why did I not see that before?" "Why would you have, First Ranger?" Eamon said thoughtfully as he looked at it carefully. "There is something about this chair that tries to raise hairs on my head that no longer exist. Something, Fae, for want of a better word." "Speak plainly, Maester Eamon," said Tywin Lannister in a low voice. "You mean magic?" There was a long moment of silence. "Yes," Eamon said quietly. "Magic." Robert nodded slowly and then shivered a little as he looked around the room and at the repaired corner of the ceiling that had once had a hole in it. A hole through which men had entered the room and sat upon the chair and, gone raving mad by the sound of it. "Looks more comfortable than the Iron Throne," he muttered after a moment. "But I'm not risking my wits sitting in it." He peered more closely at it. "What are those carvings at the back of it? And what's that alcove in the arm for?" "They look almost like flying creatures of some kind," Benjen Stark replied. "And I'll be the one risking my wits, Your Grace, if you please." "To the gate then," now Robert rumbled. And so Benjen Stark led them again, out of the chamber with the chair and then to another tunnel that had wooden planks that crossed a well that led to the strangest gate he had ever seen. A gate made of weirwood, that face sent a chill up his spine. That was as nothing to what he felt when the first ranger stepped forwards and the eyes on that face opened, eyes that were blind and sightless. And then it spoke. "Who are you?" "I am the watcher on the walls. I am the fire that burns against the cold, the light that brings the dawn, the horn that wakes the sleepers. I am the shield that guards the realms of men," Benjen Stark said in a steady voice. "Then pass." And the fucking thing's mouth opened and expanded until that was all it was. He stood there, irresolute for a long moment, and then he followed Benjen Stark down the passage that had appeared. Magic. Fucking magic. A magic portal. He knew it existed, but it was still something that was just stunning. And the more he thought about it, the more he wondered about what they were facing. How he needed to get a grip on all of this. Cope with this. No, understand this. As they emerged into the open air on the north side of the wall, he heard thunder crack overhead and he looked up at the clouds. Was there a storm coming? Perhaps not. "It was here that we faced them," Benjen said as he gestured at the area. "The whites came from over there. The others too. The bodies were burned over there. As for the bodies of the others, they turned to ice and snow." They all stood there for that long moment, looking north. There was a keen wind blowing, one that made all of them wrap their cloaks about their bodies, and he wondered what a true winter wind would be like. "The Black Gate, it can only be used by living man of the Night's Watch, yes." "Your Grace," Eamon said firmly. "The histories are clear on that fact. Does any man here doubt what we face now? That magic exists and is something that we must factor into our plans." There was a collective shaking of heads and mutterings of no. Then head on back. "Maester Eamon, might I have a word about what we might face?" As the other lords departed through the Black Gate, the old Maester approached. Your Grace. Your pardon, did you read the last part of the message from Pike, about John Stark? A small smile crossed the face of the ancient maester. I did. He is married now. To a wilderling. Grit. I remember her, what a mouth on that girl. Oh yes. Eamon sighed after a moment. I hope that they are happy. Robert looked at the closing more of the black gate. What do you think that his paternal grandfather is screaming now in the depths of whatever hell he's in? Eamon smiled, a very thin smile indeed. Nothing worth a damn thing. He smiled and laid a hand on the shoulder of the old man. Quite right, now, lead me through the black gate. There's much to do before tomorrow. Chapter 57. Chapter text. It's been the most horrible fortnight and a bit that I can remember for some time. Mum had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's at the start of this year, and she had also complained about various aches and pains, which turned out to be pancreatic cancer, which spread. My wife and I dropped everything when my sister told us to get up to Colchester Hospital at once, and we did. We were told that Mum had some days before the end. Mum never liked to keeping to any other schedule but her own, and the end came in hours. We were lucky to get there when we did. We spent the past 2 weeks at Dad's place. It still hurts to not think of it as Mum and Dad's place. And then, like a harpoon to the heart with a gas bill attached to it, our dog Maisie died on Wednesday. She'd been battling what we feared was cancer since the start of the year. On Wednesday I found her collapsed on the lawn. We took her to the vet that was literally around the corner and, well, we pick up her ashes the day after Mum's cremation. We got back home on Sunday. I packed up her toys and burst into tears. People, hug your mums and your dads and your pets. Because they don't last forever. Sarala. Alyrian Lannister was the most infuriating man she had ever known. He had not gone west to the Night Fort with his father and the king, he'd stayed in Castle Black. Why? He wouldn't tell her. Oh, he had said something that morning about being needed at Castle Black, but when she had asked him what he was supposed to do there, he just gave her that infuriating look of stillness that he had sometimes and told her that he just needed to be there. Infuriating wasn't the word. What wasn't he telling her? She watched him as he practiced his swordplay in the square of Castle Black against a man of the Night's Watch. She could tell that they were both good, most skilled, and she could also see that to one side that Lannister lackey Marbrand was watching the two from one of the balconies, leaning against a post with an odd look on his face. Horns wailed in the near distance, with horns wailing back from the gatehouse of Castle Black, and she turned to look as the gates opened. A group of horsemen rode in, and as she looked at them her heart almost stopped in her chest for an instant. No. It could not be him, but then she focused on the face of the smiling dark-haired man with a short beard who rode like man born to ride a horse and who had the tan of a man of dawn. Father. The word ripped its way out of her throat and she regretted it for an instant. She was a daughter of the Red Viper of Dawn and she should not have reacted like that. But the sight of him was also a reminder of home after so long away from it, and after a moment she regretted her outburst not at all. Her father looked at her and grinned as he dismounted and then strode towards her, his arms outstretched. Sarala. And then she flung herself into those arms, and for a long moment everything was as well as it could ever be as father hugged her. After that moment he untightened that hug and looked at her critically, his eyes searching her face. You're thinner than you were. And cold. These northern climes do not agree with you, my daughter. She laughed at that. Welcome to the war, father. Welcome to the war. He sobered at that. Ah, yes, the war at the wall, or what will soon be a war here. Father looked about Castle Black for a moment. I don't see the banner of the king. Where is he? The Night Fort, father. Come, I need to tell you what has happened. She guided him to the room that she had been sleeping in, closed the door and then stepped into his hug again, which was a fierce one. My dear daughter, after reading your tale of fighting whites and others, I was so proud of you and so afraid for you. Your report was read to the small council, or what there was of it, with the king and the hand away. So tell me everything. So she did. She poured a cup of wine for them both, sat on the bed whilst father sat on a chair, and then just talked. She told him everything that she had seen and heard, smelt and thought, feared and hoped for. She talked until she was hoarse and she was looking at the far wall, almost glassy-eyed with astonishment over what she had seen. When she looked back at father she could see, to her surprise, that he had unshed tears in his eyes. "Father! I am sorry, my daughter. You should not be a Sand, you should be a Martell. I am so proud of you. So very proud. You have seen things and done things that would make any bard in Sunspear sing such songs about your deeds." She blinked at that. Yes, father could be emotional, but the pride in his voice made her blush for a moment. "I wish that I could have done more," she said honestly after a moment of composing herself. "I should have done more. And there is so much more to come, father. Dawn cannot sit this fight out. We win or lose this war here, on the wall." Father looked at her for a long moment and then, finally, nodded. "I agree. Which is one of the reasons why I am here, having transported the wildfire that mad fuck Aerys Targaryen had made to burn King's Landing to the ground in his even madder plan to become a dragon." He looked at the pained expression on her face and chuckled. "I know, it was insanely dangerous. But it had to be done. And I made the acquaintance of the Onion Knight. It's a shame he's tied so closely to Stannis Baratheon, the man's an absolute gem." And with that father stood, clapped his hands together and rubbed them energetically. "So the king is at the Night Fort, is he?" "He is. Tomorrow at noon he hopes to talk to Robb Stark via that chair that only Starks can use." A magic chair, father's eyes were alight with fascination. "And we will see that. We ride for the Night Fort at dawn. Or even before dawn we must be there to see this phenomenon." She smiled at him. "Of course, father. And I need to talk to you about." A fist knocked politely, there could be no other word for it, at the door. Father wheeled at it and then glanced at her before saying, "Come." The door opened to reveal Alyrian Lannister, who seemed utterly unsurprised at the sight of father. "Indeed," he then bowed formally and said, "Prince Oberyn Martell. Alyrian Lannister, at your service." Father drew himself up to his full height, shot a look at her that made her swallow nervously, and then nodded. "Ah. The son of Geryon Lannister, I have been told. How may I help you?" The faintest of smiles crossed Alyrian's face, before he looked behind him. "Someone needs to talk to you." And then she saw that Ned Dane, Lord Dane, was standing there, Dawn in both hands and with a look on his face that reminded him of someone that she could not put her finger on. "Prince Oberyn," Lord Dane said as he stepped forwards. "When my father died I came north from King's Landing as soon as I could to the wall, because of the call. I was not able to pledge my allegiance as the head of House Dane to your brother at Sunspear. I would like to do so now, with you acting as a proxy." He bowed formally to father, who drew himself up and then formally, almost regally, nodded in recognition. "On behalf of House Martell I accept your fealty, Lord Dane. Your father was a good man, my brother and I were sad to hear of his passing." For a heartbeat an odd look passed over the face of Lord Dane, and once again it reminded her of someone else, a nagging, elusive sensation that made her suppress a frown. Father nodded again. "Tomorrow, at dawn, we ride for the Night Fort to see this magic chair that only the Starks can use. Will you two ride with us?" The two did not look startled in any way, but Lord Dane looked at Alyrian briefly as if he had heard something confirmed. "We will ride with you," Alyrian said. And then they both nodded formally and walked away. "Interesting," father said quietly as he closed the door behind them. "Interesting." He seemed to pause for thought for a long moment and then he smiled. "An unusual Lannister, do not worry, I will stay my hand. And an unusual Dane. Most unusual." His father, I must think on this, but I have a theory already," and then father smiled at her. "So food. And wine. And a rest before tomorrow because we will ride early." Tyrion. When he awoke that morning he had his usual moment of contentment at the fact that his wife was next to him. His wife. Who he loved and who loved him back. There were times when he had nightmares about waking up and finding that she wasn't there anymore, that their time together had been nothing but an illusion, that he was back in his bed, alone, in Casterly Rock, not father's heir, not the wielder of Rocktooth and the warnings, just a bitter drunken dwarf with a liking for whores. Those nightmares were terrible ones. Especially as he often wondered just how like father he could be. He was father's heir, but how far did that go? Father had been marked by grandfather's folly, He had to be harder and harsher and less of a fool than grandfather had been. But how much of that driven by apparent need and how much by the internal character of the man? Tyrion knew that there was a darkness within him. Daisy brought out the light. And it was as simple as that. Which was why he was so afraid to lose her. Stop that. He looked at his wife. What? You're brooding again. He wanted to say I am not, but the words would not leave his mouth. Instead he sighed. I can't help it. Yes, you can. She rolled over, the sheet falling in a way that exposed those lovely breasts of hers. You are not your father. I know that you worry about it, and I know that you are right to worry about it. I know that you sense a shadow within you. Her gaze hardened. But you also know that shadows are banished by the light of laughter and love and wanting to be a better person. And I know that you are a far better person than your father is. So, stop brooding and kiss me. He did so, and when they eventually left their quarters and went to the great hall to break their fast, he was suppressing a smirk, and she was looking, in his humble opinion, like a cat that got the cream, although he could think of a number of different ways to allude to making love in the way that they had. As they were sitting down and tucking in, he was famished. Lewin strode in, looked about, then make a beeline for where they were sitting. Lord Tyrion. Lady Daisy. You must see this. The maester handed over a thick sheaf of papers, a combination of some kind of report, written in small, tight handwriting, and carefully drawn pictures in various colored inks. It's from Maester Cresson at Dragonstone. Tyrion looked at. He chewed on some bacon, and then he and Daisy both blinked, swallowed, and then looked through the papers that were now spread in front of them. This was at Dragonstone. These, cave paintings. Wait, and those handprints. Children of the forest. That's the work of the first men and the children. Daisy said excitedly as she looked at the pictures. Those are carved runes. Place of seeing past, no, remembering. And those are painted images of wights, and others. Tyrion breathed as he looked at some of the other pictures. Cresson found these by a great vein of dragon glass. He did indeed. Lewin nodded as he looked over the papers. They came by horsemen from White Harbor. Cresson said that he sent detailed accounts to Winterfell, King's Landing, and the Citadel. Then may the gods bless Maester Cresson, Tyrion said as he looked at the pictures of the paintings and the carvings. They knew, didn't they? They knew the danger they faced. They knew that the others were a terrible threat to them. He stared at the sketch of a three-fingered hand and a thumb. And they knew the children of the forest. They allied themselves to them, even down there in Dragonstone. I wonder, what else is on that island? That hidden godswood when Shireen was cured. What else was lost, over the years? Daisy asked sadly. He looked at her and she smiled a smile of infinite sadness at him. My father would have adored this, every bit of it. Fascinated by it. He smiled back at her. I wish I could have met him. And then he pored over the drawings and read the report from Cresson. Should we mention this to Quicksilver? We should, Daisy muttered as she also looked at the papers in deep concentration. There's history here that must be woven into our plans. We must ally ourselves more firmly with the children. He looked at her. You think that happened in the past? I do. She seemed to struggle with the thought for a long moment. It would explain much. Ned's children are all wargs, potentially at least, and there is something about this link between Bran and Quicksilver that makes me think that the alliance will happen again. They have a destiny. She said the last four words with an inflection that made him pause for thought. He nodded after a long moment. It would indeed make sense. And with so much at stake, he paused for a long moment and then gestured with one hand as if grasping something. We cannot waste any chance on this. There is so much at stake. Everything rests on this, on what happens at the wall. Gods, we cannot fail on this. If we fail, we all die. Daisy looked at him for a long moment and then nodded. And then she looked away, seeming to be nervous. I'm late. He peered down at the pictures again. Late for what? Late as in my moon's blood is late. And that made him freeze in place on his chair, as if he had suddenly become a part of the wall. Late. 10 days late. She took a deep breath. Tyrion, I need to talk to Maester Lewin about this, but I think that I am pregnant. He looked at her, feeling dazed. Something seemed to have happened to his stomach and he felt impossibly light about his head. Really? Yes. She looked at him, seeming concerned. Are you all right? Really? Pregnant? Yes. Possibly. I need to talk to Lewin. Husband, are you all right? He considered this for a moment. I am perfectly fine. And then everything went black as he fainted. Robert. There was of course a log waiting for him to carry around the main courtyard of the night fort in the morning, and he did his usual exercises first thing after waking up in a room that showed every sign of a lot of repairs. The place was old, he could tell that by the stonework, and he could even see runes carved into some of the lower courses of the walls, like Winterfell. It made him wonder about who had built what at the wall again. He needed to ask Umber a few things, as there was a man who hid his wits behind a loud and boisterous visage, a tankard of ale waved in the air before him at almost all times, and then those keen eyes. Almost as keen as Manderley. Or Ned. He almost paused as he huffed his way in his latest circuit about the yard. He knew he'd been a shit king, but he was a lot less shit than he used to be. If only Lyanna had lived, and then he thrust the thought away. No. No, he could not go down that path again, he would not wallow in grief and pain for what was past. He'd tried that in the past, and what had it gotten him? A fat belly, an aching head, and a life of existing. Not living, just existing, like a ghost in his own life. And 3 bastards had been passed off as his, right under his own nose, because that nose had been buried in too many cups of wine, or the tits of too many whores and other women. Storm King. He needed to be that title, but he still didn't know how to. Well, he needed to, and right fast. Ned from all accounts was becoming something that he probably didn't understand either, but the realm needed them both. If Ned was turning a key within him to become that something else, gods, what had happened in Old Town? Then how could he do the same himself? Would the runes help? Stormbreaker. More visions of the past. He could feel his shoulders burn, his thighs too, but he kept on at it, matching the previous day's total and then adding 2 more, before throwing the log down and then taking a piece of cloth from Barristan Selmy with a nod of thanks. Your Grace is pushing yourself a little this morning, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard said. I should not ask why. Sir Barristan, he replied as he wiped his face and neck, which streamed with sweat despite the chill air. If I ever slack off again, you have my permission to tell me that I am doing so. Use whatever language you like. Selmy's mouth twitched. That might not be proper, but I will find a way if it is necessary. He paused. Your Grace, might we talk somewhere we can not be overheard? I have a plan about the new Kingsguard that you commanded me to build. He eyed the silver-haired man, saw the resolution in his face, and then nodded as he pulled a clean shirt on and then reached for a coat and robe. Up on the wall. The platform to the top is safe again, Mormont says. Up on the wall it was. The members of the Night's Watch left them alone in one of the vantage points of the north, where a brazier burned. Selmy took a deep breath. Your Grace, Blount must be dismissed, Trant must be reviewed, he is a strange man, and Oakert must be questioned. And there must be new appointments. Which is where I have a plan. 7 is too small a number, and besides the pressure on them is too great. Whilst we have had no Crispin Coles in many a year, Selmy's voice grew cold and almost as icy as the wall itself. The actions of Hightower, Went and Dane in the matter of the Lady Lyanna Stark are almost as bad. I suggest increasing the number of the Kingsguard from 7 to 49. That would expand our number, make it easier to defend, Your Grace, and still be an auspicious number for members of the faith. 7 times 7, I see the symbolism. He nodded with thought. What else? They must be chosen from those who are truly worthy. Brave men, not those tied to great houses who have done no great things. It is not enough to be a great jouster, they should be real knights, those who keep to their vows, no matter where they are from Dawn to the north. The north does not have knights the way that the Reach does, but I care not. The castles in Winterfell, both of them are true to their word and every bit as good as anyone who swears an oath to the 7. His face worked for a long moment and Robert waited as the man wrestled with the words. And we need a new oath for the Kingsguard. One that does not make them mindless servants, who obey even the most monstrous orders. The Lady Lyanna, the wildfire under King's Landing, that can never happen again. This is not. I must think on this more, but we must have a balance between duty and what is right, your grace. No coals, no high towers, just that. His fist hit the nearest wall. That reminder: the king must be reminded of what is right. Even if the king dismisses that Kingsguard, he must be reminded of what is right. Robert looked at him for a long moment as he considered what he had said, and then after a long moment he nodded. If I ever go as mad as Aes or Origer, even if the latter thought he was doing what was right, only to realize that he was wrong, you stop me, Sir Barristan Selmy. You're right. Some things are just wrong. Unacceptable. Crimes against the realm. Selmy drew himself up and then formally nodded. Robert nodded back and then quirked an eyebrow. You wanted to tell me your plan in a place where the lords and lickspittles couldn't hear you and get appalled by your plan. The Lord Commander of the Kingsguard pulled a slight face but then nodded again. I fear the initial reaction to my proposals, your grace. There will be those who will nod and say that I have a good point, but then ask if this is the right time, or if we should be cautious, or if the leading lords of the realm should be informed first, so that they could press their suit for the more suitable candidates first. He dipped his head in response. I understand. That's why we're up here, isn't it? Selmy smiled slightly. I would not want any hints to leak out. This will be controversial, your grace. He snorted. Good. You're right, it's a good idea. He paused. You'll need larger quarters in the Red Keep, whenever we see it again, that is. And the White Book will either expand to many volumes or will have to be much abridged. But this is the right thing to do, your grace. I know it. Then go ahead and do it, Sir Barristan. You have my full permission. Selmy drew himself up again and then bowed formally. Honor to serve, your grace. A horn wailed in the distance and they both turned to look south at the entrance to the night fort. Far below he could see a mounted group approaching the gates. There were banners at the front of them, one quite distinctive, and Sir Barristan Selmy sighed. It seems that dawn is here, your grace, the Red Viper, unless I miss my guess. Oberyn Martell, he agreed. Well, let's get down there. He quirked an eyebrow. I doubt that even the Red Viper will cause too much trouble here. Not here, not with all this happening. Your grace, predicting what the Dornish will do is never a confident bet. Nevertheless, I will extend them every confidence whilst watching them like a hawk. I can do no other. He chuckled. As a fellow Stormlander, I agree. Robb. It was a long morning. A morning that he wanted to be shorter with almost every moment. The wait for noon to arrive was almost agonizing. But the wait was important. There was so much to do, so much to organize, including his own wedding. He had to confess that matters were very different from his last one. He forced his mind away from that. Jane Westerling was, in the past, so to speak. Matters like that made his head hurt at times, thinking about what was the past in his head and yet had been yet to come when he looked at the calendar. As Mother had pointed out, Grandfather would be in two minds over him wedding an Umber who was also a Wilderling. Or half a Wilderling. He didn't care. He loved Val and she loved him, and that was that. It wasn't like before, when his choice of wife had been political or even a matter of life and death. Well, he had to admit that there was politics involved in his marriage. Him marrying Val meant another tie to Mance, now Lord Raider, and the Wildlings as a whole. Jon marrying Ygritte might also get tongues wagging. But drawing the Wildlings in and over the long term, making them a part of the North as they should have been, before things went wrong at the Wall so many centuries ago, that was a part of what he and Father had discussed, part of what they had agreed on as a long-term plan. Of course they had to survive the war at the Wall first. He turned his attention back to the desk and the endless flood of messages and decisions that would have to be made. Lord Reed reported that Moat Cailin's repairs were going well and that the cost was far less than had been feared. Lord Manderley reported that trade with the South and Essos was most profitable indeed, and that Cersei Lannister had been safely delivered to her new home off the coast of the Vale. That made his eyebrows go up and down. He wondered how she liked her new home. Hopefully she loathed it as being insufficiently grand for someone of her status. There had been at least one message from her escort saying that the bloody woman had tried to seduce various members of the group. They had been warned about that and all distrusted her. He worried about what Father was going through in Old Town. The starry September would not have liked having to admit that other gods existed, let alone could be killed, he was very sure about that. He just had to hope that father came home quickly, his business in the south taken care of. Starks did not prosper in the south. Burying himself back into the messages meant that time flowed freely, and before he knew it Lewin was knocking on the door to the solar. Lord Robb, it is almost noon by my reckoning. He stood and nodded, his throat suddenly tight with tension. Is everyone gathering? They are, including Quicksilver. Another nod and he strode out of the room, Lewin at his heels, Grey Wind following. When he reached the passageway to the doors he could see the others waiting there, Mother at their head next to Val. Sansa was holding hands with Domeric, Arya and Bran looked excited, Tyrion looked as if he was slightly stunned whilst Daisy looked as excited as Arya and Bran. The rest of the terrible foursome were there as well, whilst the castles were all assembled. Septa Mordane was even there, looking rather odd without her headdress. And then there was Quicksilver, who looked calm and composed. Based on what Daisy had quietly told him and a stunned mother, she might be destined to be Bran's bride. Arya, Bran and Quicksilver opened the doors to the room with the chair, and as they all flooded in, Val strode in at his side and her hand reached out to squeeze his quickly in encouragement. Magic, she whispered. Conjured by my betrothed. She winked at him and he smiled back at her, wanting to kiss her thoroughly, but then he looked at the stone chair and took a deep breath. And then he sat down in it, placing his arms on the stone armrests on either side. His nostrils flared for a moment as he took another breath, and then he looked around curiously. How does this work? The night fort is to our east, your uncle should be already sitting in the chair as their noon is slightly ahead of ours, and... The doors suddenly slammed shut with a great squealing on hinges, and the lanterns that so many were bearing guttered and went out. It happened with a rapidity and speed that stunned them all to silence, and then, before anyone could say a word, Robb felt himself thrust back into the chair as if a great hand had pushed him. He tried to say a word but instead fell silent as all of a sudden the wall opposite seemed to slowly brighten, as if something was slowly, tentatively, waking up. What? It was Tyrion speaking, but then his voice drained away. On the wall opposite they could all see vague figures emerging from the darkness. As the seconds passed, as Robb could feel his heart beating, the light seemed to change and increase. There was a room now visible, with a chair that mirrored the one he was sitting in, a familiar room, the night fort. He could see Uncle Benjen sitting in the other chair, with the king standing next to him, the old bear and Maester Aemon on the other side, and close to them an assemblage of the lords that had gone with them to the war. Tywin Lannister was there, Lords Royce and Redfort, and a tanned black-haired man was standing next to Sarilla and staring straight at him. There was a long moment of silence, and then the king said, "Well, fuck me." Robb found himself gaping at the wall, and then he swallowed. "We heard that, Your Grace," he said, and noted how everyone in the other room seemed to jerk back in shock. "And I can see that you can hear me." We can." Uncle Benjen looked as if he was about to burst with pride. "By the old gods, it works." "After so long, indeed it does," Maester Aemon said, and Robb smiled as he heard how alive and vibrant the old Maester seemed, like a child discovering a great wonder. Then Maester paused. "Ah. Lord Robb. I see that you have a guest there. Would that be the child of the forest, of which your message spoke?" Quicksilver stepped forwards and bowed, her hands starting at her heart and then spreading out in what almost looked like a ritualistic display. "You are the older dragon blood, Maester Aemon, yes. I see the younger one there as well, the crowned one, the Storm King." There was another moment of stunned silence as the people in the night fort stared at the child of the forest. The king's face seemed to go very red for a long moment, but then he seemed to take a deep breath. I am the Storm King, of House Baratheon now, but also of House Durrandon. And yes, there is Targaryen blood within me, the blood of Valyria." Quicksilver straightened up. "The dragon bloods were very mighty once, but lost their way and broke their own lands under their very feet. Magic is to be used and not abused. It is a lesson that you must all learn." The two rooms seemed to stare at the child of the forest, and then she bowed at them all and stepped back. The king seemed to collect himself for a moment and then stared at them all again, at Winterfell, and then shook his head. "Gods, we can all see you and you can see us. What a gift this is. It shortens communications in an instant. As long as there is a Stark there, Uncle Benjamin said dryly, and the king nodded and chuckled. Aye, as long as there is a Stark in both chairs. He paused. Were there any more chairs ever made? I can't remember ever seeing the like in Storm's End. Lord Lannister. Was there ever one in Casterly Rock? Tywin Lannister seemed to come out of what place he has retreated to in his own head, given his expression. Sadly not, your grace. Only 2 were ever made, Quicksilver said. Grown out of the rock by Starks who were Stonesingers. The king nodded almost regretfully. A shame then that more could not be made. Then he paused. Or can they? Are there any Stonesingers left? No one knows, just yet, your grace, Robb said hoarsely, not looking at Bran, whose mouth was hanging open at the sight of the room in the night fort. But, as old things are waking, perhaps that might as well. King Robert nodded slowly and then clapped his hands together, something that seemed to make many in the room start. Well, now we should meet once a day, now that know that this works. Such a wonder. I can't imagine what Ned would say about it. A marvel. Now any new news from the realm? And Solowyn stepped forwards with the late's messages, and Robb sat there feeling stunned. After a moment he felt Val's hand find his. Magic, she mouthed at him. He smiled back and then looked at the wall where the night fort was projected. Yes. Magic. And valuable. Jaime. The further north they rode, the more uneasy he felt about it all. It was a creeping feeling, a growing unease and worry that preyed upon his mind. There was something terrible up here, in the snow and ice, amidst the trees. It could be all too quiet at times. Where were the birds? The animals? The direwolves? When they saw the great scar in the snow that showed the passage of thousands of feet, he felt true alarm kindle in his mind. The green man halted them the moment that they first saw the edge of it, and Jaime could see concern in his eyes for a moment, before he relaxed a hair. Whites were here, driven by others, the old man muttered, before tilting his head a fraction. Heading west. Not south. Interesting. Not headed for the wall, Brian said, her own eyes narrowed. Not yet, at least. They're waiting for something, the Blackfish agreed. The start of winter. Jaime pulled a face. Such numbers, why not attack now? They don't think like us, Sir Jaime, the green man rumbled as he gestured them forwards to cross the trampled snow and vegetation. They've been patient for thousands of years, rebuilding their strength. What's more months to them? Nothing. Whites rot in heat. They'll wait until winter. Or until they're ready to bring winter south. And they can do that. Don't underestimate them. Bring winter south. He wanted to scoff, to laugh, and then he saw the look on the faces of the others. They were not scoffing. They were intent. In agreement. He swallowed his words and joined them in riding north, across that scar in the snow, where here and there he could see the occasional wiggling thing on the ground that made him blanch and look away. Fingers and toes. Blackened and rotted, but still fingers and toes. Gods! How old were those things? They kept riding north, although there were times when he thought that the green man seemed to be wandering. Searching. Almost sniffing the air at times, like a bloodhound in search of a trail. And then, as the sun started to head down towards the horizon, he seemed to stiffen in his saddle and then led them in a brisk canter straight northeast. After a while he could see a hill in the distance, heavily wooded, and he could see weirwood trees there. As they approached he saw that the green man seemed to both relax a hair for a moment and then also gird himself. The Blackfish looked at the nearest weirwood tree, and then Jaime blinked as he saw the carved face on it. It was a Heartree. This place is warded, the Blackfish said approvingly. Strongly, too. Against whites, and others. Brian looked around as well, with the same look as the Blackfish had on his face. The green man turned in his saddle to look at them both and then nodded with evident satisfaction. And then he pointed at a cleft in the hillside. There. As they rode towards it, Jaime realized that the entire area was encircled with weirwood trees, and from what he could see were they all heart trees. Who warded this place? Wildlings. Green men. Neither, said the green man with an odd tone in his voice. Our hosts did. Our hosts. Jaime frowned. Who are they? They are our friends and not our enemies, so keep your hand from your sword, Sir Jaime Lannister. They call themselves those who sing the song of the earth, but we call them the children of the forest. And then he nodded at the cleft and Jaime's eyes widened. There was a small figure standing there, at the opening, larger than a child but not much more. The figure was female. Was wearing a cloak of what seemed to be leaves and its hair was red, brown and gold, whilst its skin was brown. And it wasn't human. As they approached, the green man drew rein and then dismounted, before bowing to the little figure and speaking in a tongue that he had never heard of before. The short figure seemed to stiffen in shock for a moment, before bowing almost ceremoniously and then replying in what seemed to be the same tongue. Jaime could see the Blackfish and Brian dismounting quickly and then craning their heads slightly to listen before then nodding slightly and looking at each other as if they were gleaning bits of it. As for Jaime, he sat there, feeling poleaxed, on his horse for a long moment, before dismounting himself. He felt almost clumsy from being so stunned. There had been word that the children of the forest were still around, but he'd almost scorned that, given that they had been unseen for so long. He could almost imagine Tyrion tutting over his head right now, telling him not to be so foolish. "I shall speak your language, so that you all can understand," the little creature said after a long moment. "I am named Leaf. Or that is the small word that summarizes my true name." She eyed the green man. "We thought ourselves alone. You were not. The Isle of Faces and other secret places remained intact, south of the wall. I know, or I know now. The sacrifice made by Rickon Stark will never be forgotten. We will sing his name for many years to come. Sing of what he did." The green man nodded somberly. "He carried out his task. He was braver than many ever could be. And he will never be forgotten. We see each other again now. And the ways are open. Most of us here have gone south already." She smiled slightly. "I remain to tend to he who thought himself the last Greenseer. You have come in time, he does not have long left. I sense you have questions." "We do." The green man turned to them all and then nodded. "We have someone to meet." And then he led his horse, and them all, into the cleft. Tallard. 10 days. He was 10 days too fucking late. He had been away, traveling on business that had not been as successful as he might have hoped, and then came home to discover that his remaining family had not just been evicted but his daughter almost sold into serfdom. And then worse. Sent to King's Landing, sent to an establishment, sent to a whorehouse more like. She was too young for that, too innocent. No, it was wrong. He had tracked her down, but then he had heard that she had died. Oh, it was an accident, the madam of the whorehouse had said, but he knew different. He knew the truth. He had asked about, and he knew that the man who claimed to be a knight had killed her, all but murdered her, because he liked his horse young. Well now. He knew the name of the man. And now he knew his face. And now he had a knife in his hand and the horseman had his back to him, neck exposed above that white cloak as he strode to another whorehouse, and all he had to do was grab him and pull him into that alleyway by that factor's office and then plunge that knife in as hard as he could. And then he ran. Varies. As far as the people near the modest building near the docks of King's Landing were concerned, it was owned by a shipping factor called Telion, a man of Isozi roots, who traveled a lot but who always eventually returned to his adopted home in the city. To become Telion meant wearing a rather scratchy wig, affecting a slight limp and perfecting the heavy skull of someone who had many cares. Which meant that it felt good to sit in the room at the top of the building, take off his wig, unfix his skull and raise a glass of wine to his own acquaintance Rollis, a man who had also known Illyrio, who raised his own in salute and then sighed tiredly. "You are, I note, a little late in your voyage from Volantis and also look fatigued. May I ask why?" Rollis sighed again. "Essos is, well, on edge. Much is happening there and you need to be aware of it all. For one thing, the Bravosi have searched Pentos from the highest loft to the lowest undercroft and are now so convinced that Daenerys Targaryen is not hidden in the city that they are expanding their search to the outlying area. And they are sending many searching parties." A worm of unease went through him for a moment. "They are that keen to find her." "No, they are that keen to find her dragons. The Bravosi have dreams of the wonderful irony of using the last dragons of Valyria to crush the first daughter and the other colonies of Valyria. Dreams that, drive them very much. They are searching very hard. And there is the danger. Varys frowned slightly. Danger? His old friend laughed harshly for a moment. Volantis knows that Bravos failed to capture Daenerys Targaryen and her dragons and are sending out their own search parties. So are the other free cities. Why should they not? The Dothraki have vanished eastwards, about which I need to speak later, and whoever finds that girl and her dragons might tip the balance of the game of cities. And if some of those parties meet one another and clash and tempers are hot or, worse, someone finds the girl and her pets, well, blood will flow. And a war might start. The unease was stronger now. Matters are that tense. Rollis sighed again and then nodded. Volantis is, beyond tense. They know that there's a war coming. They just don't know where from. Bravos taking Pentos again, well, that's not unexpected. Throw in the Targaryen girl and her dragons, they see the threat. But what can Bravos have in terms of dragon riders in the future? More than enough Dragoseeds, either from Dragonstone or the Free Cities. Or hoped for Dragoseeds. You know how the Valyrians treated their slaves. The Bravosi have their hope and Volantis knows that. No, matters are tense in Essos. And those search parties will scour the area, searching for the last Targaryen and her dragons. He nodded slowly. He might need to move the girl and her dragons, and soon. Then he frowned a little. You mentioned the Dothraki. Rollis shifted in his seat a little. Odd tales from the Far East. I do not know how much credence to place in this, but there was rumor really that one of the 5 forts had fallen to the Walking Dead. It was retaken, the word is, but, well, it's a strange enough tale that people are talking about it. Strange enough indeed. One of the 5 forts. Beyond odd indeed. Please pass on more if you hear anything. Recent events here have made me take tales of the Walking Dead more seriously. Matters north of the wall have demanded the attention of the crown here, and I have to say rightly so. Truly. Rollis looked unsettled. Truly. He said the word firmly. I have seen evidence of such. Small cages filled with the moving parts of dead people. Rollis looked even more unsettled at that. Then I will keep an eye on many matters. He sighed again. The other reason why I am late is that Volantis sent ships into Valyria to search for more Valyrian steel. And none returned. Which should hint at how desperate some are getting. Indeed. He sipped some more wine and then nodded a little. Time to move more pieces on the board. And then he heard the sound of someone shouting outside the building and then others. Something seemed to be going on and he needed to find out what. Jon Arryn. He stared down at the scroll of paper that had once been wrapped around the leg of a raven and which was now in his hand. The words were tiny, written as small as possible whilst still being legible, and they spoke of, well, almost madness. But then what was life these days, but a series of fantastic events, almost out of the age of legends. He remembered the first time that he laid eyes on Ned Stark, a boy who was trying, almost successfully, to hide how homesick and afraid he was. The words "I am a Stark of Winterfell" were almost visible on his lips. That boy had become a man that he was very proud of, a man who was proven leader in battle, a father, the Lord of the North, the man who had sent the call, and now, the man who had killed a god. He sighed and kept on walking down the corridor. Ned had killed a god. A god. As a man of the Seven, the very thought made his skin crawl. How could a god die? How could a man kill a god? Could a man who killed a god be more than a man? He shivered for a moment. What he did know was that Rickard Stark would have been bursting with pride over his son. He had always known, or perhaps suspected, that Ned would always have been a better Lord of the North than Brandon. Rickard's first heir had been too impulsive, too wild, too ready to draw the sword before talking. Ned was a better man than Brandon, not that he meant to speak ill of the dead. As he walked into the room where what remained of the small council now met, he could see that Valerian and Merryweather were talking with Pycelle, who looked grimly focused. "My lords. What has you so intent?" Valerian looked up at him. "The number of madmen in the docks has increased, Lord Arryn. We have word of at least 100 men in the city who have lost their minds, screaming the same thing that they cannot hear the voice of. He held up the message in his hand. "The drowned god, yes. The three men stared at him in some shock. Well, Pycelle said after a moment, looking far more focused than he normally did, yes, my lord. He strode forwards into the room and sat at the table there. Word has come from the High Tower in Old Town. Ned Stark has killed the drowned god there, in the gate at the base of the High Tower. There was a stunned silence for a long moment, and then all three stood almost as one and either gaped at him or bellowed the word "what?" He smiled thinly and then tossed the message down the table to Pycelle, who grabbed it quickly and read it. "My gods," he said eventually in a whisper, and passed the message on to the others, who almost tore it in two as they grabbed either end of it. That would explain much. If the madmen are all Ironborn. In such numbers? Merryweather asked, looking horrified. Here in King's Landing. In any large town or city that has docks there are bound to be such people, Valerian replied grimly. The Ironborn often seemed to intercept the choicest of cargoes with excellent knowledge of the ships and crews carrying it. They had intelligence from the docks. Yes, this explains much. But for a man to kill a god, how can this be? John sat at the head of the table. The message speaks of a detailed report coming from the High Tower, written by the new Lord High Tower. He shook his head for a moment. And the mention of Lytton High Tower dying in a fight against Euron Greyjoy is, by all the gods, more strangeness. I hope that Old Town sends a courier on a fast horse. This will be a tale for the ages. My apologies, my lords, for my tardiness, came a voice to one side and he saw Varys hurrying in. I heard a song from Essos that demanded my attention, and then I heard of an event at the docks that needs to be brought to your attention. If it's madmen that turned out to be Ironborn, we are ahead of you there for once, Varys, John said. It seems that Pike had more of a presence here in King's Landing than we thought. I wonder where else men have gone mad once they no longer heard the voice of their now dead god. Old Town. Driftmark. Planky Town. Varys frowned as he sat. I'm sorry, Lord Arryn. Dead god. Pycelle handed the Master of Whispers the scroll. There has been a fight at the base of the High Tower. Lord Lytton Hightower lost his life battling against Euron Greyjoy, before Lord Stark drove him away, and then Lord Stark killed the drowned god. Varys read the scroll in obvious astonishment, the most obvious emotion that John could remember seeing on the eunuch's face since the first cage containing a White's head had arrived. Gods, one of my little birds sang a song to me that Old Town was much on edge, but this. I think that this more detailed report that is on the road cannot get here sooner. John nodded and then made a mental note that Ned only had one daughter so far who was not betrothed and several sons. Many lords would be beating a path to Ned's door to arrange marriage alliances. He hoped that young Robert was making friends at Winterfell. Ned Stark, the Godslayer, yes, House Stark would be prominent indeed if they won this war. My lords, he said quietly. I think that it would be a wise idea that the small council move to a more northerly location as soon as practicable. I myself will be heading first for the Vale to complete certain duties that must be done before winter arrives, and then for Winterfell. I think that White Harbor might be a suitable place initially. We will need to consult with His Grace the King and the Hand of course on this. The kingdom must be run from a place that has adequate communications, of course. I agree, said Merryweather at once, whilst Valerian simply nodded. Pycelle looked mulish for a moment. The man liked some degree of routine in the Red Keep, including visits from women of a certain establishment, but then nodded reluctantly. Varys frowned a little. I will have to make some adjustments to my system. My little birds fly to me here in King's Landing, so it will take a while to get them to send their songs to a new location, but that can be arranged, I think. He coughed delicately and arched his eyebrows at John, who remembered that he had spoken of other news. You mentioned Essos and the docks, Lord Varys. Essos is in some degree of ferment, or potential ferment. The Braavosi are new convinced that Daenerys Targaryen and her dragons are not carefully hidden in Pentos, but escaped somewhere. They are searching for her extensively, I am told. And I am also told that Volantis knows this and is seeking her as well, as are, no doubt, the other free cities and other powers. Valerian groaned. So, men from many cities, all armed, all searching, all potentially clashing. Exactly, Lord Valerian. Varys grimaced a little. War could break out quite easily, especially if someone finds her. John sat back in his chair and steepled his fingers under his nose as he thought hard. Varys, if she is out there, in the area around Pentos, could your little birds find her? Her dragons must be growing by now. Varys furrowed his brow for a moment. I can ask my little birds to search. If we had a good guess as to where she might have fled to, that might help, but Essos is so large and months have passed so, he threw his hands in the air in a gesture of worry. Even if we found her, what would we do with her? Valerian asked the question carefully. Jon had a strong suspicion why the Valerius of Driftmark had the blood of Valyria within them, and he had often wondered if they were Targaryen loyalists. He tapped a finger on the table as he thought. This is a matter for his grace. However, Daenerys Targaryen's dragons might be a weapon against the others on the wall. Some accommodation might be reached with the girl, with legal restrictions put in place. After all, she is the last Targaryen, apart from Maester Aemon on the wall. So have your little birds search, Varys. Let us know if they need reinforcements. And she is nothing more than a girl, Merryweather pointed out. She could be married into a great house quite easily. He caught their looks and flushed a bit. I know that it might be hard to arrange. Jon raised an eyebrow and made yet another mental note to keep an eye on Merryweather. The man was a good master of coin but somewhat blunt in terms of the finer matters of politics. Then he looked back at Varys. And the matter from the docks? Ah, yes. Varys pulled a slight face. I regret to say that Sir Boros Blount is dead. He was knifed in the neck by a man dressed in dark robes almost at the door of a particularly insalubrious establishment that dealt in, young girls. He died quite quickly, I am told. Jon felt his nostrils flare for a long moment. And then he sighed. Blount had never been really worthy of the White Cloak, and Robert had written to him that Selmy was working on a plan to change the Kingsguard. Well. This made it a little easier, surely. Chapter 58. Chapter text. Jaime. As they walked the horses deeper into the cleft, he could see that it was becoming a tunnel, and a wide one at least at the start. There was a place where they could unsaddle the horses and leave them, munching on what looked like oats, although where the oats had come from baffled Jaime. The short creature, the child of the forest called Leaf, had pulled out a bag of them and tossed them to him. For your steeds. And then they descended further down into the tunnel, which narrowed sharply here and there. The roots of weirwood trees ran everywhere, and several times he almost caught his foot in one and stumbled. Their way was lit by the occasional sconce with a flickering candle, and then strange things that glowed, like mushrooms of a kind he had never seen and did not want to touch. Every now and then they passed an opening to a cave where white bone gleamed in the limited light, sometimes of huge skulls, that of giants. And sometimes smaller ones. He shivered a little at the sight, so many graves, or close to that of so many creatures. Leaf scurried ahead of them, showing them the way, and he'd turn sometimes to see how they were doing in the narrow parts. The Blackfish and Brian were navigating everything with just the occasional stumble, but the Green Man, he seemed to never put a foot wrong, ducking under every hanging root. He swallowed a little. There was a child of the forest, something that father would once have dismissed as a grumpkin or a snook, in front of him. He raised his eyebrows for a moment, thinking that Tyrion would be scribbling notes and barking questions right now. Instead it was him, stumbling about against roots and wondering what the musty smell was. Eventually Leaf slowed and then gestured them into another cave, and his breath caught in his throat. The cave was a large one, with what looked like a great dark abyss next to it, and he could hear water flowing somewhere far below them. And by a natural bridge over the abyss was, well, it looked like a throne of white weirwood roots. And on it was a corpse, dressed in rotted black robes. The skin was white, the hair was silver. And the roots of the throne seemed to be wrapped about the corpse and even seemed to be growing inside it. If this was Brynden Rivers, Bloodraven, then he was dead and had been for a while. Leaf for some reason led them right to the corpse, and he was about to turn and jape that, what, they were there to talk to a dead man, when all of a sudden the corpse opened one red eye and looked at him in a way that made his guts almost curdle. He was alive. How could the man be alive? There was a root going through his other eye. Duncan. The man in the weirwood throne said the single word in a voice as dry and dusty as an ancient tomb. The Green Man walked forwards and looked at the figure on the throne with what looked almost for a moment like pity in his eyes. Brynden. How? Jaime asked in a voice that wavered far too much for his own liking. Can he still be alive, like that? That seemed to amuse the person that had once been Bryndon Rivers. Determination, it rasped slowly. The Isles of Faces was denied to me. The green man shook his head a little. It was never denied to you. Not truly. But you never chose the right time, or asked the right questions. So here we are. And we must talk. Renly. He looked about his solar in Storm's End and then sat and sighed in the great chair behind the desk. The trip from King's Landing had been a fast one and a safe one. No storms had threatened their passage, the trio of ships that had taken his company south to his family seat. And there he had had to face reality, the reality that was the Stormlands that he ruled. The reality that Uncle Eldon had made him face. It was not as bad as he had thought. No. It was worse. He had been home for 2 days, and during those 2 days he had realized that he had been a fool indeed. The Stormlands doubted him, that was the best that he could say, based on the initial soundings that he had taken. But it was more what had not been said that had alarmed him. It was the looks that slid around him, uneasily, the flicks of the eyes away from him, the glances of men over their shoulders when they heard him approaching, and the sense that they were talking about him and would now pretend to be discussing something else. Little things, but they added up into something that gave him a growing sense of unease and alarm. The day after he had gotten back to Storm's End he had discussed the organization of the muster that would take place once Robert gave the word. Such a mobilization would not be easy. The Stormlands had not gone to war on such a scale since the rebellion, since the Greyjoy had been mostly a naval war, and a great deal would have to be organized ahead of time. And his initial decisions had been, well, eyebrows had been raised. With Penrose in Winterfell, still mentoring Edric, the deputy castellan of Storm's End was Sir Bryndon Stedman, the brother of Lord Stedman, and he was not a man to mince his words. He had pointed out that the war that was coming on the wall could not be a war of cavalry, or indeed of chivalry. It would be instead a war of survival. And so, when Renly had talked about moving Stormlords to the north and talking of cavalry formations, Stedman's eyebrows had drawn down as he pointed out facts and figures and reality. He could tell that Stedman and others thought that he was greener than grass. And then there was the other word that hung in the air. Robert. He was being compared to his brother, again and again. And he had a feeling that he was falling short. Robert had Stormbreaker. Robert was on the wall, being king. Robert was virile. Had children. And he, Renly, had what? What legacy did he have? What legacy could he leave? House Baratheon had 3 heads at the moment. And Robert had legitimized 3 of his bastards, and who knew what he had in mind for them. Stannis had Shireen, and his wife was pregnant again. And what did he have? Nothing. Not yet. He needed to show the world something. He needed to show his Stormlords something. He needed an heir. He felt his fingers as they drummed on the table, and then there was a knock on the door. He stood. Enter. Lord John Kellington walked in, bowed his head formally, and then closed the door behind him. Lord Baratheon, you requested to see me. He smiled, nodded, and then poured them both a goblet of wine from the decanter that he had set out earlier to breath. You are, I believe, a lover of wine. Let us see what you make of this. He handed over the goblet. Kellington took the goblet, peered into it, sniffed it, and then sipped it. A most noble red wine, but I cannot place it. 'Tis from the southern Stormlands, laid down by my father almost 30 years ago. I was told that it has now ripened almost fully. Kellington sipped again and then smiled. You honor me. Your father knew and loved his wine. If he laid it down to ripen over so long, he must have had great confidence in it. My thanks, you do me much honor. As they both sat, Renly smiled slightly. You knew my father well. I did. I squired for him, many years ago now. The day that news came of his death, it was like a physical blow. He was a good man. If he had lived, perhaps the rebellion might not have happened. Perhaps it was inevitable. But if he had lived, then he would have been king instead of Robert. He paused, smiling. He would have been a good king, too. A reluctant one. He frowned slightly. I don't understand. Lord Kellington smiled, his eyes far away, lost in memories for a heartbeat. Some men who dream of or expect power like that of a king should never be allowed anywhere near it. And others who avoid it make better use of it when granted it. Renly thought of Egon the Unexpected for a moment and then nodded thoughtfully. And then he cleared his throat. Lord Kellington, there is something I need to ask you. The older man stilled in an instant and put his goblet down. I did suspect that. And I think I know what. You wish to ask for the hand of my Bethany. He blinked and nodded. I do. I have come to deeply appreciate her wit, her beauty and her intelligence. I wish her to be my wife. But you expected me to ask this. I did. Bethany told me that she suspected that you would ask me for her hand. And then Kellington stared at him, his blue eyes hard and intent. Lord Baratheon, there are certain matters of which I must speak with you. He suppressed a sigh. And here it came. Such as. The older man sighed openly and gustily, and his eyes flickered about the room in a way that was all too familiar to Renly before returning to him. We will speak of this but once, and that time is here and now. There are rumors, Lord Baratheon, and more than rumors. There are tales of things that people have heard of and seen. Of things that have not been discreet. He felt his blood almost freeze in his veins for a moment, and then he flickered an eyebrow at Kellington. I think I know of what you speak. There is, at the very least, talk of a petition. Kellington's brows lowered. One at least, from certain lords, asking his grace to make Edric Baratheon your heir until you can provide one of your own. Hence, I think, your need to marry my Bethany. He repressed the rage he still felt at that mention of such a petition and merely nodded choppily. Yes. He said the word hoarsely. I have heard other rumors, my lord. Kellington said the words remorselessly. Rumors that make me wary of giving my permission. Yes, Bethany would make a wonderful Lady Baratheon of Storm's End. She's clever and wise. But I would have her happy, content, with children and not doubtful of who her husband really loves. My Bethany is more than clever. I have 3 sons and 1 daughter, and that daughter is more intelligent and more observant than many people that I have ever known. She would know falsehood in a moment if it is spoken to her. Lord Baratheon, we are both Storm Lords. Storm Lords are not like the flowery cunts in the Reach. We are blunt and we tell the truth. I would have the truth from you. What does Loras Tyrell mean to you? He swallowed for a long moment. He is someone, he said eventually, that I will not see again. Someone that I thought that he pulled his attention together. He means nothing to me now. And if you wish me to swear so, then I shall. He meant it, he had to let go of the past, he had to let go of Loras. Gods, it hurt, but there was no choice. Kellington stared at him and then looked away for a moment. I understand. And you must understand that if I agree to this marriage, then Bethany will have to help you rebuild your position in other ways. The rumors, well, people talk of Robert and not of you. Of Stormbreaker. And of him becoming the Storm King of legend, however that might happen. They do not talk of you in that way. Renly sighed a little. He had a feeling that there was more coming. He was right. The older man shook his head a little as if in astonishment of the oddness of it all. And then he looked back. I have heard of another loyal petition, one that Lord Estermont might not mention to you because he has not heard of it yet. There is talk of appealing to his grace to take the Stormlands under his personal control again as his personal domain. Rage took him for a moment and he forced himself to stop the death grip on the arms of his chair. That would not be. That would be something that his grace would see as a direct insult to you and therefore to House Baratheon. And he'd crush the head of anyone who would mention it. Kellington tilted his head. Only 2 fools have mentioned this folly to me. I told them that they were idiots. Hopefully others will do the same to those who propose this folly. But the more time passes without you acting on this matter of marrying and getting an heir, the more people will think and talk about it. And someone, at some point, will do something stupid. You talked of rebuilding my position, Renly said, hoarsely, fighting to get his temper back under control. There was a long moment of silence in the room. Lord Baratheon, I must again be blunt, there is doubt in the minds of many of your Storm Lords that in this great war that is to come on the wall, This war where we will fight creatures from some of the oldest legends in Westeros, this war that we must win, or we will be nothing more than walking dead corpses covered in ice and snow if we lose, that the Stormlands can even play their part if we are led by a sword-swallowing pillow-biter. If you marry my daughter you must prove that you are not those 4 words and that you are committed to your wife my Bethany and her alone. That is my one demand. I would have her happy. Making her so before the eyes of the Stormlords would cause the rumors to be doubted. And that is where I stand. Do you agree? The words hung in the air, like iron chains around him. The blood was thundering in his veins and he wanted to rip the chair he was sitting in apart, as he fought to keep the famous Baratheon temper under control. Things were even worse than he could thought in his worst nightmares, but Bethany Kellington gave him a chance now. A chance to keep Storm's End under his control. And the Stormlands. Swallowing his temper he stood up. And then held out his hand. I agree. Kellington stood as well. You agree? I do. I would swear it, if need be in the chamber where the Durandons lie, where Stormbreaker was found. Kellington's gaze searched his face. And then he took his hand. Then we have a wedding to plan. And right fast. Winter is coming. Ned. They left 2 hours before the dawn, a quiet cavalcade of horsemen who met at the docks of Old Town and then trotted north up the road to the gate there. There was no point in hiding who he was, a cloak and a hood would not have helped. The huge direwolf loping along by his side meant that the few people around at that hour knew who he was in an instant. Which was why he was leaving the city so early. He had no intention of causing any trouble by calling attention to himself. He knew full well that the Starry September was still in a ferment, that certain Septons were trying to deny the truth, whilst others acknowledged what he had done at the High Tower. It was politics and religion, all mashed into one horrible mess, and he had no intention of making anything worse for the new Lord Hightower as he stepped into his late father's place and did his best to cope with what was coming. Willers Tyrell rode by on one side, with Sir Garth Hightower on the other, followed by his own men. As they rode along the road he could hear the first calls of Stark. Stark. Long live Lord Stark, Stark to rise up as the fisherfolk and early dawn merchants started to cry his name. Others started to take up the call and he winced a little. It was too early for word to reach the Starry September and those power-hungry buggers. That said, as they rode the call was heard by a growing number and he raised a hand in acknowledgement as people started to open their windows and peer out at the noise. He glanced at Lord Tyrell, who nodded, and the trot became a slow canter. The cheers were starting to wake more and more people and he really wanted to be gone. The problem was that Old Town was a big city and even at a canter their progress was not as fast as he might have hoped. Uncle Baylor has my full support, Ned Willers said as he looked to one side at the shape of the Starry September in the distance. There were lights being kindled in there. If more fools arrive to cleanse the gate he'll tell them to bugger off. You're right though, best to leave before more ferment in the city. He nodded and then sighed in relief as he saw the north gate ahead of them. The gates were already open and there were guards there. The tumult was still building, but much of it was behind them, as the city started to wake. He was warier of ambushes than he had been before, after that battle against Euron Greyjoy at the base of the High Tower. Stark! 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 The cries were all around him and he winced again, before sending a quick look at Willers, who grinned at him. We all owe you much, Ned. I'm more worried about the aftermath and the starry bloody September. Fools will ever be fools, Ned. He laughed and then they were through the gates and the road was open before them, with just a few wagons leaving the city with their cargoes of goods. North, it was, for a while. And then east. To what had once been the Tower of Joy, that place of cursed memory. Because he had to do his duty. Like a Stark. Jaime. The cavern was warmer than he first thought and like the others he took off his cloak as they settled around the weirwood throne with the man who should have long been dead by the look of him. The green man had shot the near corpse a look of almost pity as he took down his hood and then removed his cloak. Sir. Jaime jerked his head to one side. The green man walked over to him as the Blackfish and his wife settled themselves on the ground at the base of the throne and looked at them with similar quizzical glances. Why are we here? What answers can he possibly tell us? The green man directed a level look at him. More than you think, Sir Jaime. Now he looked to one side and Jamie flinched slightly as he realized that Leaf had approached on noiseless feet and was standing next to them, holding a carved wooden bowl with something in it. "Eat this, sit down and grasp a root." He peered at what was in the bowl. "Is that paste?" "Very good, Sir Jamie. Weirwood seeds. You will need them to see the way." The green man smiled briefly, padded up his cloak and sat down at the base of the throne. "I will need them." "Not you," and his breath caught in his throat as he realized that the Blackfish and Brian of Tarth were both motionless, their eyes complete white. "We've danced this dance before." "You haven't, not really. Eat the paste, sit down and grasp a root. Now." He ate the paste quickly, shivering a little at the note of command in the old man's voice, and then sat down. The ground was rough and he shifted a little, before grabbing a white root. "Now WH." Darkness surrounded him and he fell into it. He didn't know how long he fell or for how long, but suddenly, with a jerk like the parting of drapes, light returned, blinding light, and he held a hand in front of his eyes and blinked. He was in the throne room of the Red Keep, before the hulking thing that was the Iron Thong, but it was not the room that had seen recently. No, it was the room as he had first seen it, with monstrous dragon skulls on the walls and the banners of the Targaryens hanging between them. How is this possible? He looked about the great room, which was empty of anyone else and silent. "Because this place exists in both our heads, Lannister." He turned swiftly at the voice. It came from the Iron Throne, in which a white-haired man dressed in red and black was sitting, a sword across his lap. He blinked. The man was younger and had both his eyes, but it seemed to be the near corpse on the Weirwood throne. "You're..." Brynden Rivers Bloodraven was the name. He remembered the tales now, stood easily and strode down the steps of the Iron Throne with what looked like practiced grace, sheathing the sword in a scabbard that hung by his side as he did. "I don't look the same." He gestured at one of the windows and Jamie could see for a moment the silent figure of the near corpse on the white throne. He grinned. "You're only as old as you think at times." Jamie took a step back. He had no words for this. "Why am I here?" This seemed to cause the albino man a moment of deep thought. "Why indeed are you here? Looking at you, knowing what you've done, gods, is this what House Lannister is reduced to? Your ancestors must be raging, boy. To have dragged the name of House Lannister through so much mud and still have a head on your shoulders." He shook his head. "If I had been Hand of the King when your crimes were revealed, then you would have died. Simple as that." "Crimes," he opened his mouth, but then another voice interrupted. "Leave the boy alone, Brynden." The green man strode forwards, as he had been in the cavern, and Jamie looked at them both, confused by the difference. "We're not here to judge him." "Then why is he here?" "He has potential." Bloodraven scoffed. "Potential? The boy can't see beyond the end of his nose and is too impulsive." Anger stirred within him. He was not a boy. "He has changed," the green man said as he strode up to them. "He can change more." Bloodraven looked at Jamie with what looked like disgust. "You always were the optimist, Duncan. Too fond of broken things. The boy is a fool. How many times has he failed people? I am not a boy. And I am standing right here." The words boiled out of him, bitter and angry. They both looked at him and he felt himself shrivel in fear. For a moment they both seemed to be huge and gigantic, with eyes that burned with red and green fire, whilst he was but a child. And then the moment was gone. "Given our ages," the green man said quietly, "you are indeed merely a boy." Then he looked at Bloodraven again. "I think that he can learn." "Can he?" The albino looked at Jamie and then placed both hands on the pommel of his sword and stared at him. "Sir Jamie Lannister. Who veers from doing the right thing, killing that mad lunatic Aerys Targaryen, to doing the wrong thing, like not telling anyone why. Who left the wildfire under King's Landing. And who betrayed his next king by committing treason against him. He can learn. He's come a long way." The green man looked at him levelly. Bloodraven sighed. "I have known many people in my life," he said eventually. "And I have long known that what truly defines people is how they deal with the shadows that lie within them." The throne room seemed to darken for a long moment, as if a great cloud was passing in front of the sun. "Some call those shadows," Demon's Bloodraven was looking at him now, his red eyes hard and judgmental. Whatever you want to call them, they're always there. Baser desires. Impulses. The darkness that so many of us have. Some of us fight those shadows. Some deny that they exist. And some not just embrace them, but clothe them and feed them, like my father did. So how have you dealt with your shadows, Jaime Lannister? What have you done to fight your baser desires? He swallowed, feeling genuinely speechless as Bloodraven's words struck at the core of his being. He had no words, and he could tell by the mocking smile that the albino knew. Bloodraven gestured at the nearest window again, and he looked up to see himself in the cell at Winterfell again, facing Robb Stark and his direwolf again. Robb Stark called you the kind of man who would throw little boys out of windows. Are you not that man? Bloodraven's voice was harsh and pitiless. He finally found his voice. No, he swallowed. I've never done that. But you have. In a way. In this time, how many servants stumbled onto you and suspected something? But your sister told you that she would take care of them. What did you think, that they were sent away to a farm somewhere, like an old dog? The window changed again, becoming an image of a guard in Lannister red heaving a body down a shaft and then being rewarded with a kiss by Cersei. And then the same guard peering down the shaft and then being hit on the back of the head by his sister with a large and battered candlestick. The guard fell, his head hitting the wall of the shaft and then vanishing. But he had no words. Then he rallied. I never threw any boy out of any window. The throne room blurred for a moment and was then replaced by a much smaller room. He blinked as he saw the figures within it. Cersei was there, wrapped in a sheet. Brandon Stark was there in the window, and then there was himself. He was dressed in a shirt only, looked tousled and tired. And then the words, "the things I do for love," were spoken. Bran Stark was pushed out of the window, his face astonished as he disappeared downwards. He almost screamed in horror and darted towards the window, and then they were back in the throne room. He reeled. That never happened. I did not do that. In this time, no, you were not given the chance to do so. But can you deny that if that was the only way to hide your treason with your sister, you would not have done that? Really? Bloodraven's words were implacable, merciless. Is that not what you are? All your life, you've been impulsive, reckless, unable to see the implications of what you do. We have been diverted from a future that is closed to us now, after the old gods brought Robb Stark back from the moment of his death. Let us see what would have awaited you in that time, shall we? Everything blurred, and suddenly he was watching himself again, slightly bearded and ragged, taunting and mocking a man who looked like an Isozi sellsword, who then bade his men grab him and hold out his right arm, so that his hand could be severed. He almost screamed at the sight, watching the other him bellow with anguish. More blurring, then himself again, one bandaged stump against his chest as he rode, bearded and despairing, down a road, escorted by a battered Brian of Tarth. Again, blurring, and then he was standing at the man gate to Riverrun, facing a stone-faced Blackfish, his right hand a golden mockery of a live one. I give you my word of honor that. Your honor. You have no honor, boy, don't you realize that? Kingslayer, Oathbreaker, Sister Fucker, which one is it? What should we call you? If we surrender to you, we're as good as dead. The phrase will murder us all, once you are gone, back to the warm embrace of your sister's thighs. Don't lie to me. Your word is worthless, all of Westeros knows that. What next? Threaten Edmure with the murder of his wife and son. That confirms your lack of honor. You're not a man, Lannister. You're vermin. A slug. Now fuck off and go away, you worthless cunt. Sieges are dull and I've taken your measure. And I'm disappointed. Everything shook again and they were back in the throne room. After a long moment he cleaved his tongue off the top of his mouth as he realized that he was on his knees. He struggled upright to stand on trembling legs. What was that? A truthful series of moments from different times at different moments. Bloodraven smiled at him cynically. So are you better than that? Or not? You know what you could be. Can you be better? He sank to his knees again, overwhelmed and weeping, before he rallied and scrubbed at his face for a long moment as the images flashed through his mind. How can I be? Fight your shadows. Battle them. Spit in their faces. And perhaps you might achieve your potential. Bloodraven looked at the green man. Enough. The green man looked at him. Perhaps. He clenched his fists. I will fight this. I will fight my shadows. I swear it. You swear this oath? He could not tell who asked it. I swear it. Break it and you die. I swear it. And then red fire was all around him and he cried out before falling into darkness again. Jon Stark. They sailed away from Pike at dawn, a small flotilla of ships all headed for the north. Word had come that West Watch by the bridge was manned again, with anxious watchers with mirish eyes peering west to make sure that no more icebergs with others and whites drifted south again. He and Ygritte were on Asher Greyjoy's ship, the Lady of Pike herself commanding as she needed to bend the knee to King Robert and find out how the Iron Islands could now help. The reader had been left behind in Pike to command in her place and they knew that he would make sure that all was well. They even had a cabin to themselves and it was there that were now as the ship rose and fell in the waves and Ygritte turned a bit pale at the motion. I'd rather be on deck, she said hoarsely. Why are we here? Because there's something I need to show you. She looked at him owlishly. Now. The way my stomach feels right now, no. You might think that fucking me would take my mind off feeling seasick, but it really bloody won't. He looked up from where he was rummaging in his backpack and looked at her. What? No, he reached down and pulled out the wrapped oval shape that he had hidden in the backpack for so long. Here, he said as he handed it carefully over to her. Look at that. Ygritte peered at him for a moment and then unwrapped it slowly. When she saw the first glittering swirls of the dragon egg she gasped. It's beautiful. Then her forehead wrinkled. But what is it? It's something I needed to show you here, somewhere private, where no one can overhear us. It's a secret, you can't tell anyone about it. It's important, Ygritte. It's a dragon egg. Confused, she looked at it again and then at him and then back to the egg. I don't understand. He sighed and then took her hand as he sat next to her. I will hold no secrets from you. You are my wife. I love you. But this is something that you must know. Ned Stark is not my father. His wife stared at him and then she laughed. Give over. Of course he is. You look just like him. You're a Stark to your fingertips. Why would you say otherwise? He winced. I am a Stark. Just not Ned Stark's son. My mother was Lyanna Stark. Ygritte frowned at him. The one who was abducted by the Mad King's son. Yes. He looked at the floor, his cheeks heating with shame. She went willingly at first. She believed his lies. But then, when word came of the death of her father and her brother, she wanted to leave. And he wouldn't let her. He held her against her will. And then, he stopped, his words no more than a choked-off whisper. After a moment he rallied. He had his Kingsguard hold her down and spread her legs. And I was the result. There was a moment of horrified and utter silence between them both. You're the son of the Dragon Prince. The one that died on the Trident. I am. I'm his bastard son. Ned Stark, who I love as a father, saved me by claiming that I was his bastard instead. Because otherwise I'd have been murdered, or so he feared. Murdered. Ygritte was as white as a sheet and her hands shook in his. But when Cersei Lannister married the king after Rhaegar's other children were murdered, do you think that cold-fucked Tywin Lannister would not have had me killed if he had known of my existence? I would have been knifed and left to die. And King Robert hated Rhaegar. My father Ned Stark couldn't take the chance. He took a deep breath into his lungs and then looked at Ghost, who was watching him from the corner of the cabin, his red eyes unblinking. So now you know. Another long moment of silence followed. Who else knows? Lady Stark. Robb. Uncle Benjen. A few on the wall, including Maester Aemon, who gave me the egg and my sword. And the king too. He knows now. He met my mother in Winterfell in a dream that I'm not sure was a dream. She begged for my life. He granted it. As long as I don't try and become king myself, I'm not a threat to him. But it's still a secret. Too many idiots out there. Too many fools. She looked at him, her hands tightening on his. Ned Stark is your father. I've seen the way he worries about you. Cares about you. Loves you. You're his son. And that's that. She looked at the dragon egg. What about this then? What do we do about it? It was Eamon's, he said after a long moment. I don't know what to do with it. He put both hands on it. For all I know it's stone now. Daenerys Targaryen might have her own dragons now, but he paused. For a moment the egg had almost felt warm. But we don't. Ygritte nodded slowly. Then she blinked. Jon. Yes. Pass that pail. Seeing how green she suddenly was, he did so, taking the egg from her and holding it close to him as she stared at the bottom of the pail and visibly tried to discipline her stomach. It might be a long trip for her. Jaime. He came awake with a start, sweat on his brow and his hands shaking as if he had an ague. After a long moment he controlled himself and then swallowed. The others were still sitting around him, their eyes white, whilst the near corpse on the weirwood throne just sat there, eye closed. Gods, what he had seen! He almost wanted to empty his stomach on the ground next to him. He was not that man, he was not someone who pushed little boys out of windows, he wasn't. But, it was that little insidious word, that word that whispered in his ear. He had believed Cersei's promises of dealing with servants that had seen them. Like a fool, he'd believed her whilst also knowing the truth, deep down, inside himself. Oh, he'd known. Here. He started violently. Leaf was squatting to one side of him, the bowl with the remains of the weirwood paste in one hand as she offered it to him again. She'd appeared almost out of nowhere and he looked at her in confusion as she tilted her head and looked him up and down. What are you looking at? A slight smile crossed her face. I've heard songs sung of people who have sworn oaths on the Fist of Winter. I'd just never seen one before. It hangs on you. What hangs on me? She looked at him as if he was an idiot. The curse, of course. Break your word and you die. Now eat again. They're waiting for you. He took the bowl with a shaking hand. Yes, of course he was cursed. What else could it be? He sighed, scooped the remaining paste out and ate it, grimacing a little at the taste. And then he closed his eyes and grasped a white root again. When he opened his eyes again he was back in the throne room of the Red Keep and with 4 people now looking at him. The Green Man and Bloodraven were in the same places as before, but now the Blackfish and Brian of Tarth were standing there as well, the Blackfish with his arms folded and a scowl on his face as he looked at him. Ah! Did he know? Peace, husband mine, Brian muttered. You cannot punish him for something he has not done, nor will ever do now. The Blackfish said after a long moment. I know. Then he looked at the Green Man. What now? But it was Bloodraven who replied with a short and sardonic laugh as he sat down at the base of the Iron Throne. And now you ask the questions you came here to ask. Euron Greyjoy, the Green Man said curtly. You taught him, did you not? Bloodraven closed his eyes for a long moment and then sighed. I feared you would ask about him. When he opened his eyes there was deep tiredness in them. And at least you came in time for me to warn you about him. In time? Brian asked, her head tilted to one side. Oh yes. Bloodraven's smile was bitter. And then he pointed at the Blackfish. Time. It has been taken from me and given to you. Did you think that the grey disappearing from your hair was natural? The old gods give with one hand and take with another. They brought Robb Stark back and took the life of Ramsay Snow. They gave Aemon his sight back at the cost of some mad septon in the Riverlands. And they shortened my life to extend yours, Blackfish. Brynden Tully looked genuinely stunned at that. I did not ask them to, I swear it. Peace. Bloodraven waved a hand. I know. It is the old gods and their balance. You said that before, Jaime blurted. About Robb Stark. What happened? Bloodraven just looked at him, his eyebrows raised. You do not know. You were not told. He wasn't ready, sighed the Green Man. His brother knows. And his father can never know. That one hoards hatred like a fine wine. This seemed to amuse Bloodraven. Very well. Robb Stark has memories from the future in which you pushed his brother Brandon out of that window. He did not truly know that you did it, but he knew enough. He fought a war that was started when Joffrey, your idiot son, chopped off the head of Ned Stark in King's Landing after Ned Stark was betrayed by many people. Robert Baratheon was dead, killed in a hunting accident. Joffrey was king. Ned Stark knew about the incest. Jon Arryn had discovered it but was dead, and Stannis Baratheon knew as well. War followed, as bad as the Dance of Dragons, and all the time the others marched on the wall and the North was neglected. Robb Stark died, his death orchestrated by your father, and was sent back to stop disaster. He stood there almost reeling. Gods! Joffrey as king. That imbecile. He knew then. Robb Stark. When he called me, what he called me. He knew. The Blackfish said the words in a voice like stone. Why didn't he kill me? Because he's better than you. The Blackfish turned back to Bloodraven. Euron Greyjoy. There was a long moment of silence. He came here without being summoned. I thought it was destiny. I was looking for a successor without realizing that I had made many mistakes. I should have asked Cold Hands about his mission. I should not have accepted his service without wondering why he was the way that he was. I did not realize that the Isle of Faces still had singers on it. He arrived and wanted to learn. And after a while I realized that he wanted to learn all the wrong things. All he wanted to learn was how to steal power. He did not care about the Song of Ice and Fire. He did not want to defend against the others and their whites. He just wanted to know how to take as much power magic, if you want to call it that, into himself. He was greedy beyond belief. I drove him away when I realized what he was. Why? The Green Man barked the question. What is his goal? Bloodraven tilted his head to one side. Have you seen the death of the drowned god yet? Not yet. The grief of the old gods is still thick. I watched it as it happened. Greyjoy tried to be there. He almost killed Ned Stark but was beaten by him after Lytton Hightower laid down his life for the Lord of the North. It was the one time that I've been able to see him in years. He sought the power of the drowned god. He wanted to absorb it. The man is always looking for the next rung on the ladder of ambition. No matter how high that next rung is, he's always grasping for it. But he failed. The drowned god is dead. And Ned Stark still lives. His ambition is still great. Do you think that he will stop now? He'll try again. He'll reach out and try to absorb more power somewhere, perhaps in Essos. He wants more, and I know what his target is. Hopeman. The Green Man's eyes widened. He seeks that. Of course. Bloodraven laughed. He asked about what lies beneath it many times. He knows how much power it has. It created the others, even when dying. It is alien beyond belief. It is ancient and not of this world and measures time differently from us. Thousands of years are nothing to it. It measures life in terms of millions of years. So, dying is a long-term process for it. And even now it has power that Euron Greyjoy wants. The Green Man nodded. Where is he now? I don't know, and that's what should terrify you. As I said, his confrontation with Ned Stark before the gate in the High Tower is the first time that I have been able to see him in years, thanks to the old gods being there. He escaped from there and, well, he left his skin behind. Bloodraven's smile was something so thin that you could have shaved with it. His skin. Brian almost stammered. He left his skin behind. What is he? The Green Man barked. What happened to him after he left you? Bloodraven rubbed a hand over his forehead. I know this much, he went to Valyria. Fuck. The Green Man muttered the word quietly. How do you know? He went in, but nothing human came out. Whatever happened in there, he was different after. Different how? Not completely human anymore. Human mixed, I think, with something else. Something that gave him power. And sharpened his hunger. Something that can evade even our eyes. How? The Blackfish asked keenly. How is that possible? The two older men sighed simultaneously, and then, after a short nod from the Green Man, Bloodraven leant back and raised his head, and the room dissolved into mist, and suddenly they were standing in bright sunshine on a warm hill. Jamie looked around in confusion. Where were they? The sun was hot even though it was not particularly high in the sky, and he could see trees to the side that were not familiar to him. And then he frowned. There was a tension in the air, almost a throbbing that made him frown. To the south he could see a line of great mountains that seemed to be emitting wisps of smoke and ash. What is that? The blackfish rubbed at his forehead as if in pain for a moment. It's like a weight on my mind. Jamie stared at the man. Brian was looking troubled as well, but the green man and Bloodraven were merely wincing just a tad. After a moment he sniffed the air. It's like the air before a thunderstorm. The two old men looked at him oddly. You have it right, the green man said slowly. Interesting that you can sense it too. He looked at the line of mountains. These are the last moments that any green man can ever see of Valeria since the doom. This is the day itself. The doom is merely minutes away. What you sense is magic in the air, magic controlled, molded, used and abused. Until it broke, Bloodraven said in a heavy voice. The Valerians thought that they could control it. They couldn't. And they paid the ultimate price for it. But this all feels so wrong, Brian muttered. How could they not sense it? Because they thought that it was normal. When you've grown up with the sound of magic screaming as it bent, you think that that's what it should be like. That's its fine, usual, normal. Bloodraven sighed and shook his head. My ancestors thought that they were the superior beings on this world of ours. They had their dragons, their empire, their slaves, and their increasingly twisted form of magic. What could possibly go wrong? Far off in the distance to the south something seemed to almost snap. He almost could sense it, with the blackfish and Brian turning swiftly and staring. For a moment a bright light almost as powerful as the sun seemed to pulse, and then the clouds themselves seemed to flee as the mountains to the south shivered and shook and then burst apart in fire and ash. Something was headed towards them, a white shiver in the air, moving almost too fast for him to see, and it blew rocks in the air as it passed over or through the mountains. He threw a hand up in terror. There was a wind on his face. They were all going to die, and then they were back in the throne room. There was a long moment of silence. Well now, the blackfish said eventually. That was the moment of the doom, I take it. It was, Bloodraven said tiredly. Hundreds of thousands died in mere minutes. And millions more were condemned to die in the aftermath, the century of blood. And from that moment we cannot see Valeria. Not in green dreams at least, or like we are seeing now. People can physically go into Valeria, but at the risk of their lives. Magic is different there. Warped, changed, terrible. Broken, almost. It's a hole in the world, Valeria. An abyss in places. We cannot see, and I do not think that we want to see it. If what I suspect is true, there are things in it that cannot survive outside it. Or should ever be allowed to escape it. If you look into an abyss, sometimes something looks back. What kind of things? Jamie asked the question in a quavering voice. I don't know. The Dragon Lord Orion led 30,000 men into Valeria to claim it as his new empire. Not one was ever seen again. Not one survivor. Most people who seek Valeria never return. Don't forget that when Balerion the Black Dread brought Princess Aeya back, the biggest dragon that the Targaryens ever had was wounded. What could have wounded such a creature? And then, there was the matter of Aeya's death. I've read the accounts of Grand Maester Benifer and Septon Bath. I had nightmares for weeks after. There were things alive inside her. Hot things. The ice bath the men gave Aeya killed them, and for that we should be glad. What lives in Valeria now? What can live there? My Uncle Jerry and Jamie started to say, in horror. Was lucky, Bloodraven barked out. He lost his eye and much of his crew and very nearly his life, but he was lucky. There was a long moment of tense silence. You think that there's something in Euron Greyjoy then? Brian asked carefully. Perhaps, Bloodraven muttered. Perhaps something. Perhaps someone. A melding perhaps. There were reports of demons being in Valeria. What did Euron Greyjoy meet? What happened to him? We'll never know, unless he tells someone. So, him losing his skin in the High Tower, does not matter. The blackfish sounded horrified. Perhaps he does not need it anymore, the green man rumbled thoughtfully. Perhaps he can regrow it. The fact that he can evade our eyes, that worries me. He's dangerous. And powerful, Bloodraven warned. He cannot come back here, the wards are too strong. I have made sure of that. But he plots something new, I am sure of it. And he wants Hokeman, the thing underneath it at least. The Blackfish had a set look on his face, the look of a man thinking deeply. He can never be allowed to have such power, can he? Never, Bloodraven said in a voice like stone. I have little time left, but you must stop him. Especially given what I have sensed recently. I feel it in the earth, in the stones, in the water. What have you sensed? The green man looked as alarmed as he had ever seen him. Bloodraven's nostrils flared as if he was sniffing something. The others are trying to wake it up. One last thing, before it dies. And who knows what it can do? Break the wall perhaps. Make something deadlier than the others. The second long night is coming. I will not see it begin, but you must see it end. Chapter 59. Chapter text. Tyrion. They had made so many abortive attempts to go to Sheristone that right up until the moment that they had trotted their horses out of the great gate of Winterfell and onto the road, along with their escort, he had been convinced that something would have happened to cause them to postpone it yet again, some crisis somewhere, some message from King's Landing or Castle Black, or anywhere. But no. They were on the road again, the first time that he had been traveling since Ned Stark's great ride, of which he had been a small and bruised part of. There was little chance of such a fast and brutally hard ride. Not now, not with Daisy with child. If he could have wrapped her up in a ball of the finest, softest, linen he would have, despite her furious disapproval. No, as they rode south he had but one thing in his mind: would their child cost him his wife? It was something that gnawed at his brain. His own mother had died after giving birth to him. Could it happen again? He did his best to hide it, but he knew that his wife knew that he was worried about it, even though he had quietly gone to Lewin and awkwardly expressed his concerns. The old maester had nodded slowly and then pointed out that Daisy had also had a word with him, and that as she had childbearing hips, Lewin was not worried about her dying in childbirth, although he did add the caveat that first births tended to be a little harder than second births. Tyrion didn't even want to think about that just yet. One birth was enough for him right now. They traveled quickly, but not too quickly. The guards that they had with them were a combination of House Lannister and House Stark, a combination that he had worked very hard at to make work. And as they traveled south he found himself remembering that first ride north, that awkward ride with the then Daisy Sheristone, who had still been grieving for her father and who was still uncertain in how to treat the son of Tywin Lannister. He found himself looking at the crags that he had noticed before with an almost fond smile at times, before realizing that his wife was looking at him with a fond smile of her own, a tilt of the head, a nod of recognition at what she too was thinking. Gods, he loved her so much. When they reached the inn where they had first met, they both paused and blinked and looked at each other in surprise. The inn was larger than before, with an extended stable and a new extension. It also had a new name. Lion Fang and his lady. There was even a sign hanging over the main entrance, with an excellent image of Daisy and a rather flattering one of himself on it. He looked at it, astonished, before dismounting and then walking with Daisy into the inn, where they were greeted with great deference and almost affection. "Lord Tyrion, be welcome to our humble establishment," the landlady said, and he recognized her as the wife of the merchant who had taken the place over after the unlamented death of the piece of shit who had previously owned it. "I hope that you do not mind the new name of the inn. We remembered your previous visit and we heard word of your exploits at the wall." Tyrion looked at her, glanced at Daisy, who seemed to be vastly amused by the entire thing, and then smiled broadly. "We don't mind at all. I don't think that I recall an inn ever being named after any other Lannister at all. In fact, I heartily approve of it." Gods, he wanted to laugh himself, and he did after they were shown to the best guest room in the inn. The place had indeed changed hugely since their last visit, and all for the better. They spent a very restful night there with just the one bout of making love, and the next day they were off again, after leaving a small pouch of gold dragons with the inn owners, as a blessing for the future and also an investment for the next time they visited. And then they were off along the road to the west, not as well maintained as the King's Road, but good enough for their party. It was rough country, hilly in places, with woods pressing to each side at times, but as they went on he could feel Daisy's spirits shift. Home, she mouthed at times, with a look of both happiness and sadness. And he knew that she was thinking of the last time she had traveled the road, mourning her father and with companions that would soon die. They stayed at another in a rougher one and then at a small hold-fast owned by a very minor house, before eventually they crested a rise and saw a rambling castle in front of them, a larger keep than he had thought, inside curtain walls that looked well maintained. Surestone Keep, Daisy said in a rough, low voice that trembled more than a bit. Home. Home, Tyrion said with a smile, and then they were off, riding towards the open gates. The guards at the gates nodded respectfully as they rode in, and in the space before the main entrance to the keep there were others drawn up. Not many, but all in what Tyrion now knew to be the Surestone livery of a red tabard with a book embroidered in black over a white double-headed axe. They were headed by a man dressed entirely in black and a maester who looked horribly young. As they dismounted, grooms ran to take their horses away, giving Daisy a moment to compose herself. And then he stepped up to her side, took her hand and approached the entourage at the entrance. Maester Grantle, Daisy said solemnly. Steward Morgan. My husband and I have returned. The two bowed. My lady and my lord, Morgan said, Surestone is yours. Welcome home. The maester's face twisted in misery. My lady, welcome home. May I present my apologies and my resignation. I let you and your father down, and for that I am heartily sorry. In fact, I failed you. I should have. Daisy raised a hand and cut him off. Maester Grantle, had you ever seen anyone poisoned with tears forlorn before? The young maester pulled a face. Well, no, my lady, but nothing, maester. Bootle murdered father, not you. My lady, I should have suspected something, I should have. Maester Grantle, enough. No more. Now, this is my husband, Lord Tyrion Lannister. I am with child, the long night is coming and we have far more important things to think of. Gods, he adored her. Grantle gaped for a moment, looking stunned, whilst Morgan smiled smugly. Welcome home, my lady. All is well, Surestone is preparing for the long night, the steward said crisply. And the library is still intact? Daisy asked the question worriedly. It is, my lady, the maester and the steward chorused, the latter passing her a lantern and some rush reeds. Daisy sighed with relief and then looked at Tyrion. Ready to see what father assembled. Delight kindled within him, they were seeing this at once. Oh, more than ready. Daisy took him by the hand and led him into the keep, a place that he noted was well designed and well protected. Well maintained as well, the flagstones were smooth and the walls inside the keep plastered. They went up 2 sets of stairs and then along a corridor to a set of sturdy double doors. As they approached, Daisy pulled out a large and ornate key. I kept this well out of sight of that whoreson Bootle, she snapped, before inserting the key into the lock and twisting it. Luckily he did not understand what was within. And then she pulled the doors open. Tyrion blinked as he looked inside. There were a lot of bookshelves inside. As Daisy walked in, she darted to one side to light candles and lanterns in sconces on the walls with the reeds from the lantern she was carrying. Gods! There were books in here. Books and books and books and manuscripts and papers, and surely this was paradise. We have much to do, Tyrion muttered. And by all the gods, he was in heaven. Dornifos Penimian. He hated being on foot, so to speak, but a palanquin on the back of an elephant was slow and large and very visible. Yes, elephants could run, but the motion always made him seasick, and a running elephant in the streets of Volantis was a bad idea. So, when the word had come from that toothless idiot Malaquo Magi for an urgent and very, very secret meeting, he had been forced to use the tunnels that existed under the city, and now he was being carried by slaves on a litter through one of those tunnels. They were wide and tall and just the thing to use when transporting troops from one side of the Black Walls to the other in case of a siege. As he was carried along, escorted by 20 of his personal guards, he gnawed at a fingernail and speculated on just what in the name of the gods of Valyria could have sparked this call for such a secret meeting of the Triarchs of Volantis. If he had to guess, it was something to do with Daenerys Targaryen and her dragons. Had they been found? If so, who had found them? Had it been one of the many Volunteer search parties, or one of the other free cities, in which case which one? As one of the two elephants on the triarchy, he was committed to trade and not war, but he knew that war was coming, a war that Volantis would have to win. Valeria's first daughter had to have the only dragons that were on the board of the game of cities. Had to. It was only right that they did. Especially if Bravos was hunting for the girl and the dragons as well. If the Bravo Sea had the dragons, well, they would use them. Use them with great abandon, probably laughing at the irony. The litter slowed and he heard guards talking ahead. After a moment he heard the sound of a large door being unlocked and the slaves carried the litter on again. He frowned a little, looked out of the side through the curtain and then prepared himself. Sure enough, after a few minutes the litter slowed again. "Triarch, we are here." The words came from the captain of his guards, who looked as worried as a stone-faced veteran of many wars could ever look. "Sir, I don't like this." He pushed the curtain to one side, swung himself out of the litter and looked at the door in front of him. "I know. I'll send word when I am ready." And then he stepped forwards, pulled a key out of a pocket, unlocked the door and stepped through it, locking the door behind him. There was a spiral staircase ahead of him and he wearily plodded up it. Why here? Why this place? Yes, the meeting room was isolated and safe and secret. Was the news really that bad? What was going on? When he reached the top of the stairs 100 steps. His legs were burning. He squinted at the passageway ahead of him. There was a solitary guard there at the end, by the closed door. He plodded along the passageway, making sure that his signet ring was very visible on the first finger of his right hand and then waved it in front of the guard, who nodded and then opened the door. The man seemed to move rather stiffly and he wondered why for a moment, before dismissing the matter from his mind. Inside he could see 3 large chairs, well padded and opulent, 2 of which were already occupied, and he straightened himself and then stalked forwards to sit in the free chair, before resting his elbows on the arms of the chair and steepling his fingers in a reflective pose. "I have come in answer to your rather rude message, Triarch Magi," he said haughtily. "Why are we here? What has happened?" He looked at the others and then he paused. Malaquo Magi and Nisos Vassar were sitting stiff and upright in their own chairs, unmoving except for their eyes, which were wide and terrified, flitting about the room almost wildly. What was wrong? Alarmed he tried to turn his own head, but then something seemed to clamp down on his body, like an iron grip. He couldn't move a muscle, other than his own eyes, which looked around the limits of his vision as best he could. What was this? Magic? What was happening? "So good of you to join us, Triarch." The words came from behind him and he realized that someone else was in the room with them. Who? After a moment a figure walked into the center of the room, before them all. The voice was deep enough to be a man, but he was so cloaked and hooded that nothing could be seen of him. "I have need of you all." The figure seemed to find his own words amusing for a long moment, given the almost gurgling giggling. "Yes," he said eventually. "Need indeed." And then he pulled back his hood and Dornifos Penamian found himself wanting to piss himself in terror and then run. The man in front of him was a nightmare of skinless horror, black and red muscle moving over bone, eyes that stood out from their sockets, no eyelids, no hair, no lips, nothing but that terrible visage. Why was his flesh black in places? "I need a few things from you," the horrible thing said, before licking its own teeth with what looked like a dark purple tongue that seemed to be too large to be human. "Hair, skin, fat. I like to walk the streets of cities and not have people want to scream for now, anyway. And, now I have you, I also have the keys to Volantis. I can briefly at least command the city. A religious ceremony, perhaps, at the biggest temple within the black walls of Volantis. Because, you see, the guard outside and a few others, and what remains of you after I have taken what I need, have a job to do. There's power to be harvested here." He stared at the horrible thing and desperately tried to break free. But he could not move a muscle other than his eyes. The skinless thing shed his robes and then flexed his fingers. "Shall we begin?" And then he knew nothing but pain and agony, like he could not stand, before the darkness fell. "Robb." It was quiet in the Godswood. He didn't know where Quicksilver was exactly, but Grey Wolf seemed to be unworried and was sitting next to him as he prayed at the heart tree and then looked up at the face carved on the trunk. He was going to get married. The thought of it all made his head swim at times, and he wondered what had gone through John's head when he had married Ygritte. John's letter from the Iron Islands had been detailed about many things, including his dark tale of Euron Greyjoy's many crimes and, well, monstrous behavior. What had he done to his own crew? His words about Ygritte had been simple and to the point. He loved her. She loved him. They were wed. Simple. He wished that his own wedding could be as simple. That he could simply march into the Godswood with Val, exchange their vows and then vanish off into his bedchamber to ravage each other into exhaustion. However, he was the heir to Winterfell and there had to be a ceremony of some significance. However, there was also the other end of the scale. They were about to be at war with their ancient enemy, the others. He had briefly discussed it with the king that morning, in one of the now daily noon meetings to address matters. Robert Baratheon had looked gravely at him from one side of the chair in the night fort and said, "You don't need my fucking presence, or your father's blessing or anything. We are at war, young Robb, a war that started thousands of years ago. You love her, she loves you, nod to your ancestors, tell your father's bannerman that it is what it is and bloody well do it. Wed her, bed her, love her." The king's eyes had focused on something just out of sight. "Don't wait. When it's before you, you grab onto it and don't ever, let it go. Marry your Val. That's a command from your king, you hear?" He and others had heard. So, preparations were now well afoot. Winterfell was abuzz with all of the activity. There were already present members of the great houses of the North, Domeric Bolton, Ned Umber, and of course Mors Umber, who had told him several times to treat his granddaughter right, or else he'd have something to say to him, Aelys Karstark and others. Jorah Mormont and his new wife, the Asozi woman, were there as well, back from the small hold that father had granted them not too far away. Mother was visibly pregnant now, her stomach swelling, and he wondered if it would be a brother or a sister for him. He knew that she was praying for a son and that she was also praying for a short war on the wall. He didn't know what to say about that. They didn't know how long the war would be. Couldn't even hope to guess. But they could not make assumptions. Word had come via Raven that Uncle Edmure was to wed Roslyn Frey, something that had made him raise both eyebrows. Some things were, oddly similar between his past and the present, if he could say that. Mother had pondered if perhaps there could be a joint wedding at Moat Cailin, to bind everyone together. No. Time was too short, he could sense it almost in the air. Summer was not ending, not yet, but he could feel something in the air, something intangible, something almost beyond the words that he had at his command. Mother and the others were sewing the cloak for Val at the ceremony that would take place tomorrow. He would be wed. And they would both be able to act on the fire that kindled in each other's eyes whenever they saw each other. He made a mental note to make sure that the bed in his room was, well, strong enough. He had a feeling that she would be fierce. Ned. The Rosa Road was in excellent shape, as it had to be for the road that went from Old Town to Highgarden and eventually to King's Landing. They had ridden quite hard for several days up it, as he had noted the amount of trade passing up and down it, something that had prompted a quiet talk with Willers Tyrell. "Ned, I will confess that were times when I wondered if my father was a blusterer. A blowout. But he was always a good father to us all, and I knew that he could be something other than a blowout. He died trying to save others and in doing so warned me of a great threat so great that I had to ask for your help. But there was something else. He always told me that a lord who neglected the roads of his realm was a fool. A good road swiftens trade and men at arms if need be." It was a good point and something that he more than agreed with. In the north the roads were vital, especially in winter. And winter was coming, as they all knew. They rode north initially at some speed but then slowed to spare the horses, staying at inns where they were welcomed with some reverence and where Frost Fear was eyed with some caution. But not fear word had spread of her. Eventually they had finally reached the fork in the road, with the Rosa Road heading up to Highgarden, but the road that he and his party needing going east, not as good as the Rosa Road but still in better shape than many roads elsewhere. Willers had shaken his hand and embraced him, thanking him for saving the Reach and telling him that he would always be welcome there, all Starks in fact, as the men around them had cheered him. It had been a strange moment, given that they had been enemies in the rebellion, but it was good to know that they could put such enmities aside for the common good. And now he and his men were riding east, towards the Dornish marches, and as they rode he wished that he was headed back home to Winterfell. There were a number of places that he wished he would never see again. The throne room of the Red Keep was one, the place where his father and brother had died such horrible, agonizing deaths, and where he had later confronted Robert after he had laughed over the bodies of Elia Martell and her children. Yes, Robert had explained about that and apologized, but the memory was still a bitter one. Another place that he never wanted to ever see again was the courtyard of Starfall, where he had had to tell Ashura Dane that her brother was dead, before handing over his bones and his sword. Something in her eyes had died that day, and he wondered sometimes what might have been in the rebellion had not happened. But that was foolishness. And then there was the place that they were riding to, the location of the Tower of Joy. He wanted to hawk and spit at the very thought of the name and the crimes that Rhaegar fucking Targaryen had committed there against his sister. And for what? Some of his best friends from the campaign had died there, fighting those honorless bastards. They rode on. The men were handpicked, all northerners, all good fighters and men who would keep their mouths shut, not that there was much to keep secret here. They were going to retrieve the bones of the dead, and that was it. The northern bones would accompany them home. How he yearned for home now. Whilst Hightowers would go back to Old Town and went to Harrenhal. There was something else though, something that nagged at the back of his mind. He had killed a god, with the aid of the old gods. The scar on his face was still there. Had it changed him in any way? He had no idea, but there did seem to be a change in him. He just could not put it into words. Whatever it was, Frostfyre did not seem to share his unease. She just loped along next to his horse, occasionally vanishing off into the woods to one side to get some food. He looked ahead as they rode, and then he saw the first glimpse of red on the horizon. The Red Mountains. Dawn laid ahead. And by the old gods, he didn't want to go there. But go there he must. He was a Stark and he knew his duty. Tyrion. The way that the Fist of Winter had killed Bootle had been terribly impressive but regrettably quick, he thought blackly as he looked at the wonderful library of books and papers and even artifacts. Lord Torjern Shuristone had been a man after his own heart in terms of being a scholar of the most extraordinary talent. The Citadel would have hung a chain around his neck for this place and then probably snaffled half of it for themselves. Shuristone had been meticulous in his keeping of notes and also his maintenance of the books. The oldest of them had been lovingly maintained and preserved, with multiple copies made in case something happened to the original ones. But he was dead, murdered by Bootle. And Tyrion could never now meet him. Which angered him beyond words. The man had not deserved to die like that, looking as if he had perished from a stroke. Bootle, the man had deserved a darker death. A slower one. He pulled his mind away from that. He was a better man than Bootle. He carefully pulled down another book from the pile next to him, looked at the title and sighed. A History of the Red Kings, with certain notes on their abhorrent practices. I've heard of this. The Citadel only has one copy. Your father had 2. 2 copies. Gods, Daisy. What else is here? His wife did not reply and he glanced at her. Daisy had frozen in place at the other side of the desk and was staring at a journal of some kind, in which Torjern Shuristone's small but very neat script could be seen. Daisy. He knew. His wife said the words in a trembling voice. Knew what? That the second long night was coming. Father knew. Or at the very least strongly suspected. Startled, he got down off his chair, hurried over and then climbed onto a chair next to her. The page of the journal that she had opened it to had a number of small drawings in it and he squinted at it. Then he paused. The crook. The star signs you mentioned. He looked at the other sketches and notations. Is that the Hearthstone? And the Fist of Winter? His wife nodded, trembling, and he took her free hand and held it as she leant back and the tears flowed. There's a note here to talk to Ned. About what his father should have told him. He feared that Brandon had been told, but not Ned. He wrote about his regrets, Tyrion. He knew. He pulled her in for a one-armed hug, as he looked at the journal. Damn Bootle. Damn Bootle to whatever hell exists for such a man. And then he set his jaw. But now we are here to speak for him. And so we will. Let's keep searching. Got knowledge here. We need to know what more your father could have told Ned. There was a long pause and then she nodded and joined him in their search for knowledge. Jamie. Exploring the cave system under the trees that sheltered them was one way to pass the time. It was hard to tell night from day in here, especially with the others too busy training to talk to him. The Green Man and Bloodraven were teaching the Blackfish and Brian of Brian Tully all that they knew, quite often in that dream world that could be accessed via the roots. He shivered a little every time he thought about what he had seen thanks to those roots. The mockery and scorn in the eyes of Bloodraven, the judgment in those eyes. He knew that the former hand of the king and now near corpse on his wayward throne doubted that Jamie could ever amount to much. Well, damn him. He'd show him. He'd show them all. The caves with the great and small skeletons were ones that he had only passed through once or twice. The feeling that the grinning white skulls were somehow watching him was not a pleasant one. It was strange to think that sentient beings would not want to be buried,